Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 291 of The Team House. I'm Jack Murphy, here with David Park. And tonight our guest on the show is Mike Chavaree. He served in 3rd Ranger Battalion as a medic, where I knew him back in the day. And then he went on, had a great career as a special operations medic, including service in the Joint Medical Augmentation Unit, and retired as a sergeant major. We're really excited to talk to Mike tonight. Really been looking forward to this episode for quite a while. I got to give a quick shout out to one of our sponsors before we get into it. I've been smoking a Sovereign No. 3 from Cayman Cigars. So is there anything better than sitting down with a nice cigar to unwind from the day? I would say no. I love having cigars to celebrate after a great show. Actually, I celebrate during the show, not after. So this podcast is sponsored by Cayman Cigar Company. They make premium cigars using the highest quality Caribbean tobacco, and the cigars are hand-rolled by master cigar rollers. What makes Cayman so unique is they are the world's only premium cigar company to donate 100% of net profits to charity. Every dollar that they don't use to roll cigars goes back to local and international charitable organizations, from creating entrepreneurial opportunities for marginalized populations to supporting the self-sufficiency of those in addiction recovery to providing specialized assistance to U.S. veterans. Just for the Team House listeners, they've created a custom sampler pack so you can enjoy all their top cigars in one pack. Head to caymancigars.com/teamhouse to check out the sampler. So, enjoy a cigar and give back to those in need. Head to caymancigars.com/teamhouse to check out our sampler while supplies last and use the code TEAMHOUSE for 10% off your order. Once again, that's caymancigars with an S.com/teamhouse for 10% off. And make sure you use my promo code TEAMHOUSE so they know that we sent you there. And I've been enjoying this one and a few others from their sampler pack. So I hope you guys will go and check them out. We appreciate them sponsoring the show. Oh, Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, guys. And I apologize I couldn't be there in person. I really wanted to be, but we just moved into this house up in Maine, and it's been a little crazy. So
yeah, next time. Well, you're welcome here anytime. So, Mike, I'm going to ask you what I ask most of our guests about their upbringing. If you can tell us a little bit about sort of like how you grew up and like what that path was that took you towards eventually Ranger Battalion.
Sure. So I didn't come from a military background. I didn't have family in the military for the most part. We grew up here in Maine, most of my family in a 20, 30 mile radius. But just growing up through elementary school and then beyond, I was that kid that rose playing Army in the woods and had camouflage passed down from friends and stuff like that. So it just kind of seemed like it would be interesting. I didn't have any knowledge from anybody else or anything like that. And this was obviously pre-GWAT. So even the military back then is not quite what we know it is today. So I think I didn't really know that I really wanted to do it until I was about a sophomore, junior in high school. And I joined the National Guard and did that whole split op program where I went to basic training in between my junior and senior year. Signed up to be a diesel mechanic, and I thought that's what I wanted to do at the time. But finished high school and went straight to AIT as a diesel mechanic, and graduated September 6th of 2001. So a few days later, that's kind of when the story completely changed. But as far as my bringing up, it's very unremarkable, I suppose. We were very tight as a family, but didn't come from money, didn't come from luxury one bit. But we did have a pretty tight family, and
that's cool.
Very supportive, and they still are. So they're still here in Maine. That's mostly why we moved back to be with family again.
So you are a diesel mechanic when 9/11 hits. What happened for you after that?
Yeah, so I got a call pretty much right after it happened, and I had to report up to Bangor for Operation Noble Eagle. I think this was kind of before they dubbed it not Operation Noble Eagle, but they did like gate guard for all the National Guard Reserve training sites, and this was the Bangor International Airport that we were there securing, if you will. And so I did that for I don't know, about a year. So it was 179-day orders, and then they put you on orders again, so they don't have to pay you the full benefits. Looking back, it was probably kind of shoddy, but nonetheless, one of the first news articles I saw back then was, 3rd Ranger Battalion had 2 casualties, Stone Cipher Edmondson, like right away, helicopter incident, and then also, they conducted a combat jump into Afghanistan. So that was pretty much all the news back in the day. So I knew that I wanted to go active. I enjoyed the active lifestyle, even though it was the National Guard. I still enjoyed the uniform stuff and doing all that. And so I think as soon as I could get my conditional release, I set my goals right on 3rd Ranger Battalion specifically. And it's kind of corny too, but that's like right around the time Black Hawk Down came out, and like, it was kind of impressionable at the time. So I figured if I was going to do something, might as well do it right. And so I talked to the recruiter about switching over, and I knew I didn't want to be a mechanic. I actually wanted to be infantry, but they said it wasn't available. Looking back once again, I think I got duped there. So they signed me up as a medic, and at the time I didn't even want to be a medic. They're like, well, they're with the infantry, so you could do that. And so went through the whole process, and they always say that recruiters kind of screw you over. I actually did get screwed over, but it worked out. The only way they could get me in a contract for medic was to say that I was not prior service. So I actually went down to Fort Benning again after I had already completed basic training. I agreed to do basic training again because I wanted to go active, and I thought this whole Afghanistan thing was going to be a 1-year, 2-year thing, and I wanted to get in there. But so I went down to repeat basic training again, and the drill sergeants came out, and they're like, hey, is anybody prior service? I raised my hand, and of course I looked like I was 12 years old. And they're like, when did you go through basic training? I was like, about a year ago. And so they identified that. I didn't have to do basic training again. They sent me straight to Fort St. Vincent, so I kind of dodged that bullet, if you will. Yeah. But even then, there was really no information about Rangers, what they do, especially the Ranger Regiment. I think everything at that time was, Ranger meant Ranger Tab. Regiment was, I knew they had Black Berets at the time, but there was no information. And I think that probably motivated me even more to join the organization. So I kind of set my sights on that, and every step of the way, whether I was at AIT, I had to volunteer for Airborne School, and as Airborne School, I had to volunteer for RIP, and it pretty much just worked out. So I was pretty lucky there.
So yeah, keeping in mind the track for combat medics, you had to go to your conventional combat medic AIT after you were blessed off at basic.
Yeah, that's 16 weeks long, and like I said, I didn't even want to be a medic, and I didn't know anything about medicine, didn't really care for it too much, so did that whole 16-week program, and as we discussed going on further as throughout my career, I realized how much a complete waste of time doing the 68 whiskey program was, but thankfully now they've kind of straightened it out, and it's a pretty good program now. So, and it was kind of difficult too, because I knew I was doing it, and I knew it was kind of a waste of time because at that time I had learned a little bit about what SOCM was, Special Operations Combat Medic Course, and most of the people I had talked to that had been or tried to go and failed out or whatever were saying it was like the hardest school they've ever done, and pretty much forget everything you're learning now. So I already kind of went into the 68 whiskey program thinking, I might have to brain dump a lot of this stuff. And it was very basic, very, I think at the time tourniquets were still taboo. So I think my biggest disconcern with all of it. It wasn't very combat focused.
Yeah.
I think it was even like healthcare specialist at the time, and it wasn't very combat focused. And I joined for, I went that route for a reason. So I was a little bit disappointed with that, but I think they've straightened that out nowadays too. So yeah, that whole 16 weeks was pretty much, I was considered prior service at AIT. So my experience was vastly different because I was already AIT qualified or whatever. So I had weekends off and we were allowed to wear civilian clothes. So the experience it really wasn't that bad. I met a lot of great friends that I still talk to today on a weekly basis. So it was a pretty good experience as far as that's concerned.
When you say that the course wasn't that good, I'm assuming it's because they were preparing you for any job in a hospital that you could have in the military. So, you like some time in labs, with labs, with radiology, with a lot of stuff that just was not applicable. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. And I think a big problem that it had, and I think that they might still have to deal with today, is the credentialing piece. So you have to be at least an EMT basic. And so I think that's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing because, a combat medic in the Army is well beyond EMT basic. But I think the reason why they wanted to do that is as folks transition out of the military, they were going on unemployment and they had nothing to really fall back on. And so having this certification, I think kind of helped them out a little bit. But the problem is with EMT basic, you can't really do a whole lot medicine wise. And so we had to train up for several weeks to pass an exam. And as soon as that was done, it was like, okay, well, forget all that. Here's combat medicine, which was a little bit better than EMT basic. So I think that the way it was structured was a little bit ineffective. And, if I was Sergeant Major of the World, as I used to say when I was in uniform, I would have probably liked to have seen the 68 Whiskey Combat Medic kind of mirror the infantry. So you're going down there, it's OSIT, here's your rifle. Because even as a combat medic, my rifle is, it's my lifeline there. So, you got your rifle, here's your aid bag, and you're integrated with the infantry. And I think that's a really big problem nowadays because they graduate the 68 Whiskey course and they haven't shot a rifle in months. And they haven't maneuvered at all with the infantrymen that they're now potentially deploying with. And I see that as a huge capability gap.
Yeah.
So those are all the things I was thinking, while I was there, and also looking back, I see that as a massive problem.
Yeah.
So you finish that, and then it's off to Airborne school in RIP, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So we were training up. I did have Airborne. I have to think back, this was several years ago, but I'm pretty sure I had Airborne locked into my contract. And at the time we had AKO, and I pulled up AKO, and it said I was destined for Fort Hood. So I was ready to jump out a window at that time. But they had this little group that could volunteer for RIP. So I'm not sure if I volunteered for RIP I think I volunteered at Airborne School, but we were like preparing for it at the 68 Whiskey Force. There was Cadre there that were familiar with it, so that definitely helped us out a little bit.
So when we were catching up the other day, we kind of realized that we probably went through the same RIP course in 2003.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we did, and it was, looking back, it was a pretty rigorous course. I think we only had 25, 26 people make it, but it was pretty rugged. I think it's relative because at the time I don't think I did anything hard, but going through that, it was quite a test. Which I'm glad they've changed it now. Now it's more of an assessment selection, so you're learning something. Because even in RIP, I went through and it was great. I finally got my tan beret and put on my ranger panties with my little teeny legs. But I really didn't know how to be a ranger. And so, in today's, RAFs 1 and 2, I think they're vastly more prepared than we were at the time.
Yeah.
Back then it was, and I think a lot of people even use RIP as a way to get to Airborne school. So I know for a fact some dudes were like, well, now that I'm here, they'd already got their jump wings. They're like, I quit on day one. I'm like, what a massive misuse of slot or whatever. But that was a lot of folks, and within the first few days I think we lost at least 100 probably. But
Yeah.
there were some notable folks that were in our class. So I think that's why we probably were in the same class.
So get to Ranger Battalion that summer. Tell us about no, I'm sorry. You have to go to
I
SOCM
didn't.
first.
Oh,
You
yeah.
have to,
I
yeah,
didn't.
you have to go to SOCM before that.
Yeah. So SOCM was, man, that was something else. So, you know, you're at RIP and everything is very indoctrinated, no pun intended, but it's very, you know, Ranger, you're running around, you're yelling, you're calling it ease. I mean, it's very, very strict. And then you get to SOCM, and like the first day, I'm snapping to parade rest, and you know we had some SF instructors and stuff, and they're just like, "Whoa, we don't do that here." So
Yeah.
it's quite a culture change. But we also had Master Sergeant Black, Perry Black, retired now, wonderful human being. So he would be looking, you know, from the back to see how we're reacting because he was extremely strict while we were going through the course. So it was kind of like, it's like having a dad that's really disciplined and then a mom that's laid back. So the SF guys, you know, I agree with the way they were. I think that there's a time and a place for the rank and the structure, but when you're in, you know, this fire hose of a medical course where you're there to learn, it was a lot easier to learn when it was a little bit more relaxed.
Right.
So,
SOCM
I
is
think
like
that was
very,
by
very
design.
academically rigorous, isn't it?
Yeah, it's it's the hardest, I think, to this day. Mine is probably Static Line Jump Master. It's one of the hardest, like, mentally courses I'd ever done. So and it's very like, you know, math and pharmacology, and I think the big difference between that and the 68 whiskey course too is the 68 whiskey course is more of like an algorithm, pretty much like I have massive hemorrhage. That's what I do for it. But you get to SOCM and it's more of they teach you how to think. So you get that a touch of the prolonged field care, and you know you're putting a tourniquet on because you're trying to preserve that blood and you're trying to keep them warm, and this is why you're doing it. Versus 68 whiskey course, that was more of, you know, you do your treatment and you move on. So it really forces folks to think way down the line instead of just what's in front of your face, and I think I really appreciated that.
And trauma care was going through a lot of changes at that time too, right?
It's unbelievable. It was. So like I mentioned before, tourniquets were taboo. I did the combat lifesaver course when I was in the National Guard, and it was like elevate your arm and put ice on it, and then it was like, and then maybe a tourniquet, and then if you put a tourniquet on, prepare to lose the limb. And we've gone so far from that, and I think, you know, the early global war and terrorism plus, you know, Somalia, all the stuff that happened there, you know, and the development of the committee of TCCC and them really saturating the special operations community with good medicine and medics who can also train the organizations and train within themselves, I think made the biggest difference. But I think that was probably the biggest contributing factor was, you know, and throughout the years of GWAT, we've seen these organizations giving back to that committee of TCCC and the Joint Trauma System to just constantly develop medicine. And I think it's remarkable. And that's even just combat medicine. You know, we haven't even touched into like, you know, ortho surgery, damage control, resuscitation. You know, I'm sure we'll chat about that later, but we learned so much more about those things too. So it was going through a period where literally a lot of the things I learned in this 68 whiskey course was obsolete and it's killing people.
Yeah.
And so, you know, now we've transitioned to this medicine, which was, you know, it was so new at that time. But it's good that it got put into that program with enlisted medics and PAs that already had that experience, and it definitely helped out.
So you make it through the course. Now you're going back to the 75th Ranger Regiment. You're leaving the SF world behind for a while.
Another culture shock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, tell us about that culture shock a bit, like landing, you know, in Ranger Battalion in your a medic, so you're, what were some of the stupid terms we used to use, like low density MOSs or whatever. But I mean, obviously a critical part of the machine, but you're not infantry. You're assigned to an infantry platoon and doing, the same job up until someone gets hurt, right? If you can just tell us about that from your perspective.
Yeah, no, I actually had a great experience there. As soon as I came over to back to 3rd Battalion, I had great mentors right away. Ralph Odom, he's still in uniform, great person. John Ditro was later on, but there were some really good enlisted folks right away that just kind of scooped me up, because infantry was like, I was a non-tab specialist without a combat scroll, so they didn't, they either know you're a medic or they don't, but they kind of give you a hard time there. But for the most part, the infantry, depending on your attitude, would just scoop you right up, and it wouldn't really be too much of a problem. So I didn't really see too many issues there, but I was pretty thankful for the mentorship. And I think medics too, there's not really a lot of that competition. We really just kind of want to absorb off each other. So as soon as I got there, I got, 1,000-pound brain people like John Mesa, Caleb Twilliger, all like really, really good medics that have gone on to do phenomenal things. And so you're working with people like that, and it just kind of helps with that, like that anxiety of being in a new organization and doing a new thing. Because, like I talked about before, like now I knew how to be a medic, but it's kind of like a basic medic. I hadn't deployed, I hadn't done anything yet, even though it's a SOCM medic. And now I kind of had to learn how to be a ranger, because RIP didn't really prepare me for that, and SOCM definitely didn't prepare me for that. So now I kind of got to figure out, what's a ranger? What's this? What do we do? And so there was a little bit of crash course there. And unfortunately, as soon as I got there, they're like, you're deploying to Balad. So I didn't really have a whole lot of time to figure it out. But my reception was actually pretty good.
Yeah.
So tell us about that deployment and, becoming a real deal Ranger medic, what the job entails.
Yeah, so that one was actually pretty lethargic, because I was really new. So I went to Balad to be like an outstation, battalion aid station medic or whatever, because at that time I hadn't done platoon evals, squad eval, like nothing. So I went over there, but I was lucky enough to be around people like Colonel Cotwall, another great American. So I continued to learn. But on the flip side, there was the infantry. So there was people that, I had just met. I was kind of figuring out, this guy's an infantry platoon sergeant. Like, what does that mean? And, I was intimidated at the time because, this guy's got like 2 combat jumps and a combat scroll. And I'm like, to me, I'm a brand new dude. So like, to me, that's like the holy grail. Like, nowadays is whatever. But so I didn't really know, like, how do I act around these people? Because I got to gain their trust. Everybody talks about being a medic. You got to get their trust. If you don't have their trust, you're really not the medic. And you'll find out really quick. So there was a little bit of that anxiety there, figuring that out. And you had mentioned low density before. I really kind of hung really close to like the fisters and the commo guys, and because we just had a lot in common, because an infantry comes back and you're cleaning weapons and doing the commo stuff or the gym, whatever. We have more work to do, so it's just kind of like hanging out with people like that, who are organic to the organization but kind of separated from everybody else. So I made a lot of lifelong friends that way. So but it was pretty good. And for the most part, even being a specialist, I went to the board while I was deployed on that deployment. So things were just happening, one thing after another. And so passed the board, and now I'm a sergeant. And I wasn't a sergeant yet, but I was promotable. But they start treating you that way. So I thought that was pretty remarkable too. It was very professional, and I really like that. So I didn't go through this whole hazing thing. I don't know if it was my personality or, I'm not really sure, because I know for sure some people did. But I had a pretty good experience. Now, while I was in Balad, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think part of that is that the medics really are sort of like, it's like a different level of professionalism as opposed to breaking in a brand new Ranger private like an E3. Like, you guys have kind of demonstrated your capacity to learn a little bit more, and it's a bit of a more adult environment, like rightly so.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. We did have a few outlier medics who somehow made it through the stalking course and then struggled learning how to be a ranger, and they did really well in the 3rd Infantry Division or the 82nd. And we kind of found ways to get them to move on, but they just weren't a good fit. But I think when people were a good fit, they stuck around and did really well. You'd mentioned Tony Moore, in our pre-call here, another big mentor of mine at the time. He probably doesn't know it, but us younger medics, we looked up to those guys, and I was very fortunate to have a lot of folks to look up to, luckily. So, and also, my ADHD is out of control, so you guys are just gonna have to work at that. While I was in Balad, took PT test and came back for Ranger School after that. So I got sent home early for my first deployment. It's kind of slow anyway, because like I said, I was kind of behind aid station, just kind of like a fill-in medic for whatever. So I came back and went straight into Ranger School. So I'd been in the Army only knowing schools at that time.
Right.
And got thrown right into, knew nothing about Ranger School. Nobody pulled me aside and they're like, hey, this is what to expect on the, like, nothing. You go back, PT test, you're going back to Career Ranger.
When you
so
were,
it was, at that time in my life, it was just one thing after another.
When you were working at the aid station, I'm curious because you mentioned the EMT basic, the MTB training, which is basically just training people to stabilize, scoop, and swoop, right? And and combat medics and medics of all, in all branches, especially more isolated stations, will do a lot more than even an EMTP will be allowed to do.
Oh, for sure.
So it's this thing of being overtrained and underqualified. Were you surprised by some of the stuff that like you were training in and some of the stuff that you were doing?
We got to give a quick shout out to one of our sponsors. We'll get back to that question in just a moment.
Yep.
We'll be back in 2 minutes, guys.
Hey everybody, this is Dave. I just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, PIA VPN. That's Private Internet Access VPN. Now, I don't know about you, but have you ever, searched something on Google, maybe like how to improve your performance in bed, and then suddenly there are ads for Viagra and Cialis all over your social media? Well, that's because your internet service provider knows literally everything you do online. And I'm not saying I did that, it was a friend of mine. But do you guys know that over 30 million people subscribe to PIA VPN? If you want to stop internet service providers from always looking over your shoulder and profiting off of your data, you need Private Internet Access, the world's most transparent VPN. Now, a VPN, or a virtual private network, is an app that hides your IP address and safeguards your internet connection through an encrypted tunnel. This way, it shields your digital life from the eyes of those that are looking to exploit your private information. And that might not just be your service provider. If you're out in public, if you're in a hotel, if you're in an airport, a lot of people can intercept the traffic going from your phone or from your laptop to a local router. The other thing that I love about PIA VPN, in addition to the privacy issues, is the streaming capabilities. Now, I am a big fan of horror movies, and particularly of zombie movies. But unfortunately, the United States doesn't put out a lot of great horror zombie movies. But you know who does? Korea and Japan. Well, PIA VPN is easy to use on your smartphone, on your smart television, on your laptop, and you can choose between 80 different countries where the server is set up. Private Internet Access is really easy to use. There are apps available for all operating systems, and one subscription can be used to protect an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. So if you want to enjoy all the benefits of Private Internet Access, now's the time to subscribe. Head to piavpn.com/teamhouse and get an 83% discount. Seriously, 83%. That's just $2.03 a month. And you also get 4 extra months completely for free. But you must go to piavpn.com/teamhouse for a truly private digital life. One last time, piavpn.com/teamhouse. Guys, you need this.
Real quick, but Like when I was a Navy corpsman, I was surprised, like getting shipboard and doing sutures and like, taking out people's toenails. And in combat, it's even more so, when you're seeing gunshot wounds and things like that. So, like, were you surprised by some of the stuff, one, that you learned at SOCM, and then two, what they actually had you doing out in the field or teaching you how to do?
Yeah, I think the SOCM course, they did a phenomenal job preparing us for that through the use of live tissue training, simulations, and stuff like that. And also, we did rotations at major trauma facilities. So I went down to Jacksonville, Florida, and did everything you can imagine. Delivered babies, did trauma on the roadside, did trauma in the OR, so in the ER. So seeing a real human being with these injuries really kind of helps subdue your emotions for that. And then as you transition into an organization where you're expected to do this full time, that's what I was expecting to see, when really that's kind of like the 1% of what I did see. So a lot of what I saw was, my feet are messed up, my back hurts. Do you have any, Toradol? So it's kind of like a little bit different, and learning that dynamic of a medic is way more than just trauma. But when we do trauma, you have to be phenomenal at it. That other stuff really became my hyper focus, I believe.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the beauty of even combat medics, depending on where they're assigned, and Ranger medics for sure, if you're trained to do something, you can do it. Underneath, a PA or physician, we had Ray Sterling, John Dietro, Colonel Cotwall. We had some Ethan Miles, all people that are, very well known in the community, and they would teach us and feel comfortable with us doing it. So it was a little overwhelming at first, but as you get more comfortable and you do it through repetition, it becomes a little bit more normal.
So you go to Ranger school because you're a combat medic. You're going to learn this shit too.
For sure.
After getting out of there, do you go to a platoon at that point? Yeah.
So the day I graduated and came back up to battalion, I was approached by the recce. I think he was a squad leader at the time, eventually a platoon sergeant. And I was directed to try out for the recce platoon. So I went straight from Ranger deployment, Ranger school, pretty much straight into the recce platoon. So, and I think that was around the time it was first being developed. So Ray Snyder was in there for a little bit. So I went in there and kind of just started from nothing. So that was my first platoon.
Recce platoons were, you mentioned this just get started, but recce platoons were a pretty new thing around that time, right?
Yeah, they were. And I think in our case, of course I'm biased, but sometimes I think some of the recce and some maybe the other battalions, it was a place where they may have put underperformers, but for ours, between our recce and sniper, I think that was some of our top performers. And I'm not saying that I was not the best medic. I could tell you I'm nowhere near the best medic, but I could run and I could rock. But some of the folks that we had in recce have gone on to do some phenomenal things, even today. So
I was there. I was there when they stood up the recce section, and I was in sniper section. And same story, man. I was nothing special. I was not the best sniper by any stretch of the imagination, but around incredibly talented people. And actually, I was talking to somebody in the recce section today who reached out to me. Do you remember Royce?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's doing good, man.
Oh, great.
It was
That's
funny catching up with him. A lot of good guys in recce, man. A lot of really good cats that, as you point out, went out and they're still doing amazing things.
Yeah, no, and they still are doing amazing things. So it was another eye opener too. So I'd done this medicine thing, and I thought it was great. And I was just kind of figuring out how to do that. And then now they're like, well, this is how you do it in this environment. And also, here's camera equipment, here's this, and here's technical stuff. And so it's just a new trade, and I enjoyed it. it worked with my nerd side quite a bit. I struggled a little bit with, I think, forming relationships with some of the folks on the teams because I think they had all come from prestigious teams and squads throughout the battalion, and I'm like this new guy that knows really nothing about anything. So I kind of struggled to see where I would kind of fit within the recce teams, but eventually it all worked out pretty good.
And then when you were there, because they are so small, were you basically a recce troop, and then had the additional duties of being the medic, or was
I wasn't so fortunate to just be a medic. So we had to do just pretty much everything everybody else did. We did, the comm stuff, the jungle 292, setting up antennas, sending stuff over HPW, which is all like archaic stuff now.
Right.
You could use the ATAC system and do everything of what we were trying to do back then. But it was very good. I think what I really liked too is they invested a lot with the platoon sergeant, the team sergeants that were there at the time. They invested a lot in our training. They got us pulled away from doing, a lot of the battalion common tasks that we would have to do, and they really made our training paramount. And we did TSE training with the cameras. We did the tracking course. Like we went all in vehicle interdiction stuff. And if there was a chance we would do it on a deployment, we were doing it here. And once again, I was fortunate enough to have NCOs that we stayed out there until we, couldn't mess it up. And so I was very thankful for that. So it was a really good experience.
So what was the next deployment?
All right, so Afghanistan. Yeah, so I deployed to Afghanistan with recce. We were split between Salerno and Bob Chapman. So we did that. Yeah. So that was the next deployment. It was kind of, as recce back then, I think we were kind of trying to find where we fit. We did CTRs, which I thought was pretty cool. So we'd go out there, and looking back now, I can't believe how crazy that really sounds. But we would get into the car, not even up armored, just got tinted windows, and I had a beard. I was darkish anyway, and I tell you, with a full beard, I fit the part. But then we had some folks that did not. But we're out there doing, a recce in a car in the middle of traffic, and I'm sure maybe they knew who we were. I don't know, but looking back, we made it work. So we had some great folks that just pulled it together.
Do you remember, Mike, there was one kid, he was so young he couldn't grow a beard. So he bought like a Hollywood beard that glued into place.
Yeah. No, that's
and when you say CTRs, you're talking about close target reconnaissance, right? So to give the listeners.
Sorry, I forgot about that. So we'd either do aerial recce's or we'd do a CTR with the vehicles and stuff. So, but it was also good too, because we were pretty much unsupervised from the battalion. We had our team sergeants or whatever, and we kind of, dealt with that. And I thought that was good too, because that provided us with a lot of that top cover. We could really focus on what we had to do. But like I said, the missions were somewhat slow, and, it is what it is for the time and where we're at. So, but it was still a good experience.
I remember you guys working the isolation piece too for the direct action missions.
Yep. We would go and do, near side, far side security, almost basic Ranger school type stuff. A lot of our guys were trained with breacher. I did breaching stuff as well. And then eventually we had K9. So we'd go in there and do, sniper. We'd even sometimes go up there with you guys, especially me as a medic. Sometimes I'd find myself hanging out with you guys anyway. But so we did a lot of that, just locking the perimeter down and doing black side security, stuff like that.
So now you're really learning how to be a Ranger in combat. Also, all of these new skills that are coming into Ranger Battalion for the first time. I mean, cruising around in low visibility vehicles with beards is not something that Rangers did up until this point, right? It was antithetical to the culture.
I think a year and a half before that, I had a high and tight and Stein boots. So it was very different. But I think that could probably be attributed to, I think, Sergeant Major Birch at the time. I think he really instituted a lot of things within the regiment. And like I said before, we had a lot of folks who, even by the time I got there, had a couple deployments. And years in battalion, so it worked out really well.
How did the line, not necessarily the guys on the line, but for instance, the senior enlisted, I think, who had been there since the late 90s, and then all of a sudden, like, you long hairs are out there
That shit
running
went
amok,
over like a lead
being
balloon.
hooligans and brigands. Like, did you guys get pushback from, like, particularly like the senior enlisted on the lines or in headquarters?
For sure. Yeah, especially when we were stateside. So we did it was like 90 days before we would deploy, we'd have start growing our beards and stuff. And there would be so much, like, and looking back, it's like, dude, like, I didn't make it up. Like, I'm just doing what I'm told, So I don't know why you're yelling at me, but it was.
I remember getting kicked out of the on-post gym on Fort Benning.
Yeah.
They're like, you can't be in here like
happened.
that. Get the fuck out. Like, what?
Yeah, we'd come back from a range and we'd be in the uniform BDUs with the Velcro up here or whatever, and no name tags or nothing, and have a beard. And some of the conventional folks would be like, "Does your commander know you didn't shave?" And I got like 3 months of beard.
Right,
no,
right.
I guess I got over on them. I guess.
Yeah, it's my 4 o'clock shadow.
So we had a little bit of that, but not too much. But definitely in battalion, there was some hating there. So
yeah, I imagine because there were still, like, that's early enough that there were still Rangers there, especially like senior guys who felt that like patrol-based activities was the Ranger mission, and that they were the best light infantry in the world, and all this CQB and all this other stuff was bullshit. Yeah,
and I think as a medic, we're very thought-provoking for the most part. So, if you're going to tell me what I need to do, or you're going to tell me this is a standard, I immediately exhume it and try to like exploit it and figure out why that's a standard, what I'm doing. And there were some instances where we had a sergeant major. I think he was the first sergeant, then became the sergeant major. His last name rhymes with Belek. And so I'd be in like the field uniform with the field authorized field boots. And my locker is in the headquarters HHC 375. So I got like, my boots on because we were doing tracking school, and they told us, wear non-standard boots or whatever. And he's like, no, you got to change the boots. And I'm like, my car is right there. I'm just wearing these boots to my car, and I'm in the field. Had to change into Bellevilles. So I get the Bellevilles on. I put my non-standard boots in the car. I drive out to the site, and I put my other boots on. So there's a lot of things like that was just like, why is this a thing? I don't really know. And I feel like people kind of brought more hate to the recce platoon because of that kind of stuff. And I don't think most of us cared. Honestly, I don't really care to have a beard while I'm deployed. It always gets caught in my chin strap, and no one's playing with it, so I don't really care for it too much. But it is.
Yeah. Nick was our first sergeant at the time.
Yes, he was, and that was some of his. It's a time and place for that. And I guess I was wrong. I shouldn't have put my field boots on 20 feet from my car. So I lived the rest of my career that way.
And then how did you guys not end up hating each other? Because this is after my time. So I had heard, and you guys can correct this, that snipers are a little salty because recce got stood up and then basically took the snipers' only mission in addition to all their others and their gear and whatnot. Like, that didn't happen?
I don't know. I think we had a really good dynamic. And me as a medic, obviously snipers don't have a medic, so I would cover down on their training, and even while we're deployed, I'd hang out with them. So I don't think we really had it. I don't think you could have told the difference, to be honest, if we're out there in a training event, other than Jack being out there with a long gun, and maybe I didn't. You couldn't really tell the difference.
Okay. Yeah, and over time, I believe it got like more formalized into like a single company, or like they were much closer together, snipers and recce.
Yep, it did. It became, I think it was after my time, but it became like that specialty platoon or specialty company or whatever. I'm not sure where they're at now, but I think that probably helped a little too.
Thinking back on it, I don't remember any like bad blood about it, because the reason why it happened was because RRD was getting sucked up into other missions, and that left the battalions without a reconnaissance element. And so the battalion recce guys that Mike's talking about were stood up to kind of like act as, is not a technical term, but like scouts for the battalion, like to go out, 10 kilometers ahead of them, recon targets and then come back and report intel is like the most basic way I could describe it, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And we did it a few times. I say a few times, but we did it a lot. But I think at the time it made sense. As we moved on through GWAT, I think they had to change kind of their focus a little bit, get a little bit more technical with TFE and all that stuff. But I think it definitely had a place. But it was, to be honest, it was pretty fun. I enjoyed it.
You get back from that deployment back to battalion, and what's the next thing?
I think that's when I hit PLDC, Warrior Leader Course, one of those. I came back, did some, just knocked out school after school, and it just continued, and then deployment again. So our op tempo was pretty aggressive back then, as I'm sure you remember. But yeah, I think I knocked out a couple of the regular Army schools because I was already behind at this point. I was field boarded while I was deployed, and I actually pinned sergeant while I was in Ranger School. And then when I graduated, I went straight to, Recce, did all that stuff. And so I think after that deployment, when I started doing the PLDC or Warrior Leader Course, whatever they called it.
Oh, interesting.
Mike, just before we move on, there's one thing that just came into my head. I remember, and I can't remember if it was one of you guys or if it was a Charlie Company medic. Do you remember the guy getting flex cuffed to the chain link fence in Salerno on his birthday?
I don't, but that sounds pretty
okay.
funny.
It might have been. If it wasn't you, I think I know who it was.
Yeah.
But that was a prank, by the way.
You remember what company would have been there?
It would have been Charlie Company.
Oh, okay.
Leo Jenkins, I think.
Oh, was it? Oh,
I think.
yeah.
I think I'll have to check with him and see if it was him. But I remember one of those guys getting flex cuffed to the fence on his birthday and covered in shaving cream and everything.
I mean, Leo's a big dude, so I'm not sure I'd want to be the one to flex cuff him.
Right.
He's a scrapper. But yeah, that's pretty funny.
Okay, so you're getting schooled up, and then on the next deployment, again with Recce section?
Yeah, yep. So went out, another deployment to Afghanistan with Recce, but this one was unfortunately cut a little bit short. So I don't remember how long I was there, maybe like a month or so. And we had a mission come down with Alpha Company, one of the platoons or two platoons, I think. And we were going to fast rope north of, I believe it was Salerno. We were going to fast rope 90-foot come on, utter misery. You're going to fast rope with 3 days worth of stuff in a rucksack, plus, medical gear, MREs, all that stuff, camera stuff.
90 feet?
90 foot was, I think their plane was 90 foot. So they 47 comes in, rope master, good to go. Glow board didn't say anything. And for those of you that don't know, glow board is like a clipboard that has like acetate night or glow in the dark tape on it. So when you write with a black marker, you can read, what it says as passing around the helicopter, because the movies aren't accurate. When you can talk like we're talking now.
You can't do an op-ord brief on a helicopter. Yeah.
No, that's not real. So there was nothing really, no surprises. They were like, all right, 90-foot rope onto this hilltop, no big deal. Well, it was a big deal. So the 47 pilot apparently found a spot on a house. So instead of hitting the hilltop, he put us down maybe 30 feet onto a rooftop, but didn't tell anybody. So long story short, the Mark Foster, the Air Force fellow that was on our Recce team, he hits the house, walks right off it, because it's what you're supposed to do in your fast rope. We didn't know we were on a building. So he walks right off, breaks his back. I come down, and the rope at this time is not even over the building. So I fall about 2 stories into a wood pile. I broke my right arm, like my distal radius. A couple other people fall, get kind of bumped up, nothing really too bad. So now this 3-day, we were supposed to just do, security from the elevation for the platoons to do their thing. Now turned into we need to get Mark Foster off this hilltop. So not only had I not trained with the 160th, a whole lot. Usually when we get in country, we link up with the medics, we do a high five, we chow together and talk about how awesome the 160th is and how bad we get smoked in regiment. And we would kind of do that and kind of get our bearings straight because they would help us out with that. But I hadn't really trained a whole lot physically with them. So here we are under zero loom, 11, I don't know, 10,000 feet. I honestly don't remember, way up there, freezing cold. And now they're hoisting a basket down. So, they're in a hover, bringing the basket down, get Mark Foster in there because he broke his back. I already got a line started, got some Valium pushed. He's feeling pretty good. A little bit of morphine, you know what I mean? Take care of my guys. And so now he's being hoisted out, and it's the first time I'd ever done it. So it was probably not ideal to figure that out on the side of the mountaintop, but it worked out. And at the time, I didn't know that my distal radius was broke. So I stay on the objective. I'm carrying some of his stuff. Thankfully, we actually exfilled, I don't know, maybe 10 hours later. Sun comes up. We didn't like to be there. We ended up leaving. So I then am taking Mark back to Germany as his medic to make sure he has that continuum of care, that he gets the care. We had what do they call it? It wasn't the Wounded Warrior program, but it was the one for Special Operations Care Coalition. There we go. So I took him back and kind of did a handover with them to make sure that he was taken care of. And then I was going to fly back into country to get back with Recce team and continue. While I was there, my wrist was like really hurting. It was swollen, just had some eighth wrap around it, didn't think much of it. And one of the docs was like, hey, can we just take an x-ray of it? And I was like, sure. So took an x-ray, and it was, fractured my distal radius. And they're like, we can't send you back in the country. So they put a cast on me right there, and I flew back to the States. So it is what it is. I was a little irritated about that, but that was my second deployment. I think it was my third deployment at that time.
Did you? I know you left, but were you in the AAR? I mean, did you? Like 160 pilots are notoriously amazing, and
I actually have the video.
It seems like an odd choice to put you guys down on.
It was, and there was some lessons to be learned from that. Of course, I talked to the pilots after the fact. They came to visit Mark, and that's a good thing about the community too. They came, but hey. We didn't. There was obviously an issue with communication there. The rope master should have known, or somebody. You should have known.
Yeah.
But they were great about it, and it did become part of the AR, and I think they used it in our MLATs and stuff like that after.
Yeah.
So that's the end of that, and then you're back at the mother station healing up at Benning.
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, it was quite an experience. Because at this time, I'd been somewhat running gunning schools, doing all this stuff, and now I'm on Rear D. So there's like 15 people on Rear D.
Right.
And so it's just like
staff duty.
I don't know what to do with my hands. I don't know what
Chavaree.
I don't know what to do with my hands. So, but there was some good NCOs that were on Rear D, and they were like, hey, go home, heal up. We don't really have too much for you. So they left me, and I was pretty good to go. And I think I came in and, like I said, staff duty, and I became like an LNO for the medics. So I would go to Martin Army, get supplies, put them on the C-17, ship them over if they needed it. Kind of did what they needed me to do.
And did you stay with Recce after that?
I'm trying to think. No, I think that might have been yes, I did. I had another deployment with Recce after that.
Where were you off?
Sorry,
to
I got
time? No, it's okay. We're going way down memory lane here, Mike. Yeah. I get it.
Yep. So that was another deployment to Salerno. Yep. So I'd gone to Salerno, and that was the second time to Salerno. Yep. And that one was we were dug in pretty good with Charlie Company. I think they had 2 platoons there, and we had some dead crew folks there and some other folks, I think, at the time. So, but that deployment there, it was, we kind of did a little bit more of, the target isolation that you were talking about, a little bit less CTR type stuff. But it was pretty good trip.
Was there less CTR because there was less opportunity, or because there was more risk avoidance?
I think you know what? It wasn't Salerno. I think it was no, it was Salerno. sorry. When I was speaking before, and I said it was Salerno and Chapman, I'm sorry, it was the Lullaby. We had team in JBAD, and we had some folks out in Chapman. But on this time, it was, I'm pretty sure I was in Salerno.
Okay.
And I apologize. My memory is just not that great.
No, it's okay.
When I think of what I did on the deployments and who I was with, that's when I start putting the pieces together. But I know we worked a lot with, I think it was Charlie Company at the time.
So the mission, it sounds like it changed a little bit by that trip back to Salerno.
It was kind of lethargic, in my opinion.
And what year was this? If you remember, roughly.
Yeah, 2006.
Okay.
Mid 2006. Yeah,
makes
because
sense.
by 2007 I was back into. I was the HHC senior medic.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
So yeah, unless there's any like memorable ops that you'd like to talk about from that deployment, let's go into being the HHC.
Yeah,
senior
so
medic.
well, there was. We had this one trip where we went to. We were in. Where did we leave from? I think we were in JBAD, and we were going north, following the river, and the mortar platoon. They were going up to, because they were acting kind of like as a platoon at the time, and one of their trucks had drove off the cliff, and we actually lost a couple guys. So that was a pretty hard deployment. As far as I think, as a Ranger medic, of course I had nothing to do with, I wasn't able to treat them. We didn't even know that, it had happened. It was worst case scenario of worst case scenarios, but that was like one of the first times of experiencing like loss, like that visceral. These are people, we just saw the other day, and so there was a little bit of processing of that, but it wasn't as visceral as later on in my career, where it was a little bit right in front of me. So I think that was a pretty memorable event, and it kind of like slowed things down a little bit, and things got sometimes we're going after it and we're just cyclists going out, and that kind of made everybody kind of test the pause for a little bit.
Made it
we were going
real for you in
we
a
were going
different way.
JBAD to ABAD. We were going to ABAD for I don't remember what the target was. I don't remember. It was a long time ago, but
it's kind of crazy that there aren't more stories about that, because those roads, those mountainous roads, were treacherous, and driving under nods in tough conditions a lot of times.
Yep.
And like when you're in the passenger side of like your Humvee or your Technical or whatever, like you're looking down over.
Oh yeah.
Like,
and you're trusting this guy with like one nut, like these PBS 14s, like.
Yeah.
Oh man. Like,
and
I've never been so scared in my life.
Yeah, and the fact that there aren't just like story after story of trucks going all over the side is amazing.
Yeah, we had some folks. A lot of injuries do come from non-combat, if you will. And it's unfortunate, but it's it's part of what we do.
I remember going through mountain passes.
And it sucks too, because dudes get hurt in a vehicle, and it's not a Purple Heart producing thing, but still get hurt. They get sent back. They got wounds. Like Brian Valentine. He's a command sergeant major. He's got his robotic arm, I call it. It's not, but he's just hurt some of the tricep there. But like these folks go back, and it's like, well, it wasn't combat related, but it was. And so these folks are dealing with this kind of stuff as they transition out and dealing with the VA, and luckily. It's in a time of war in a foreign country. It's pretty easy to show that that's combat related. But, and even, I've talked about it before, Mark Foster, he breaks his back, but it's not due to enemy fire. It's not just that, but he's still wounded just the same. And it's going to affect him for life. It's just kind of stuff. It's a bummer. But we did have a lot of vehicle accidents roll over, especially as we, transitioned to strikers in Iraq. It became a lot more prevalent.
Yeah. And, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later as we get on, but even like the Marines in Syria and the number of like artillery rounds they fired, having such severe repercussions on them for blast injuries, hallucinations and psychosis and all these things, that it was in war, but no Purple Hearts and no none of that valor, sort of recognition.
And we we didn't know what we were doing back then either when it comes to assessing somebody for mild traumatic brain injuries, TBIs, and you got your bell rung and like, well, I'm not going to just sit this one out. They're going out. This could be the Bin Laden raid. So like we're going out tomorrow. I'm going. So I think that was obviously not the right way to do it. And now we have more comprehensive traumatic brain injury process. And so thankfully.
Yeah, and they're passing some legislation now that they're going to take the soldiers' biomarkers early on so that you have something to compare it to before and after, and you can have a better judge of what kind of damage may have been done to these guys. So there is
that's
progress
really
is slow, but it is happening.
Yeah, because a lot of it's unfortunately it's irreversible, and so trying to figure out how to manage these types of folks and manage their day-to-day life for the rest of their life. We're learning so much more, and a lot of that is borrowed technology from even the NFL. Showing these micro tears and abrasions in folks' brains and what that does to them. It's unfortunate that it happened to folks, but unfortunate to get that information and what it produced.
Yeah, those concussion docs from the NFL are really sort of some of the guys on the cutting edge of a lot of this stuff.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And I've had several TBIs, so folks that are out there that have to do that joint knowledge online TBI concussion training. I'm actually in there as like a guest speaker of don't do what I did and don't just try to go out the next day, or like if I say something maybe they won't take me out. It's really not the right way to do it. When you put yourself out there, even as a medic, you might be one of one, you might be one of two, who knows, but you go out there and if you're not at 100%, you shouldn't be out there.
Yeah. Fire 90 Carl Gustav rounds at the range.
Right. The spendexes for Carl Gustavs, where it becomes torture.
That stuff is...
Yeah.
Or just like breaching night after night after night, and like some, because P for plenty is the universal formula for breach. So like, standing close to the breach, and then it's like it rocks you, and you see the white. It's like, okay, go. And then night after night, we're just now learning about the effects of all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. But luckily, they got the Ranger Medic Handbook out there, and they've got pretty comprehensive field evaluations, and some of it's even you do it over computers, so it helps keep that record. And,
interesting.
I'm glad where they're at now.
Yeah. So then you come back and you become the senior medic for HHC. Yep.
So, and that was kind of like I don't know if the undefined role. And I also did like headquarters platoon sergeant for HHC. So it kind of was what I made of it. Like I said, we had a great surgeon, great PAs at the time. And so this was my chance to work with, recce, sniper, K9, TSC. It had really taken off at this time and kind of made a really big section. Mortar platoon was in HHC at the time. So we had that really good responsibility of making sure all those medics were trained and everybody had what they had. And a big part of, being in that senior medic position too is what I think the Ranger Regiment is phenomenal at is incorporating medical training into everything we do. So it doesn't matter if we're going to the range for whatever, how do we assess a casualty while on that range and not tell anybody, so they get there and you got to make sure that all these, Ranger privates and all the way up to the unit sergeant major, that they know how to do T-CCC and how to get this casualty, to a surgical asset or definitive care as rapidly as possible and safe as possible. So being able to get in there and just kind of think of, well, what would a mortar platoon, like what would their scenario look like if they took a casualty, and kind of, figuring out what was, what was common on the battlefield at the time, what was the other battalions, what were they reporting back, and creating training opportunities. I think that was kind of activated my nerd sense of humor at the time. That made him pretty fun and sadistic.
Can you give us an example of what fun and sadistic might look like?
Oh yeah, so it would be just coming back from a range and FLA took a hit or whatever, and the medic had no clue. They'd pull open their aid bag and it'd be like candy and snacks or whatever, and it turned into like a 10-hour prolonged field care, stuff like that. So it was for a purpose, of course, but it was unpleasant.
And so what was the next stop for you after this position?
Pretty much just. I got shot. Yeah. So there
Oh,
was
that's
that
a thing.
deployment. Yeah, I almost forgot about that one. So, deployed again. Was with Charlie Company's second platoon, Mike Allball's platoon at the time, and First Sergeant Nichols, I think we had at the time for HHC. We were out on the objective, and we got these strikers just pummeled in mud coming off an objective, and so we had to wait for like the third ID to come out in these giant, wrecker tanks or whatever they're called. And so the sun started coming up, and I guess I was the one that they wanted to hit. So I got hit through my foot and my thigh. I was the only one hit as far as I remember, and it wasn't like a huge like firefight. So I guess I was in the wrong place at the right time, I suppose. But so I got hit, obviously came back from that, came back stateside yet again, and did the whole rear D thing for a little while.
How bad? Do you mind if I ask, how bad was it when you got hit in your foot and thigh?
Yeah, so it actually wasn't that bad at the time. I know people are like, yeah, getting shot's not that bad, but at the time I had a Smith & Wesson SWAT pocket knife in my pocket, and the round actually hit the knife. So the knife and the round are still in my leg, and I got shot through my foot. And growing up as a medic, they always taught us, and I had Mike Melvin, who's a phenomenal medic. So he was taking care of me, and I was also doing, I had the fentanyl lollipop before he even got me. I ain't playing around. So,
Right.
But we always do this thing where, like, if it's squished in your boot, so you push up on a boot and they have the little eyelets with, blood comes out, then you might hit an artery because blood will go down your leg and fill your boot, whatever. So at the time, my boot, I could feel it squishing, and I was like, oh man, at that time, I thought it was arterial bleed. I got a tourniquet on, doing what I'm supposed to do. But come to find out, I actually got hit in the top of my foot, and that's where the blood in my boot was coming from. So it actually wasn't as bad. It wasn't as bad as it could have been. If that knife wasn't in my pocket, it would have shattered my femur, center mass.
Wow.
So it definitely would have been a bad day.
And think of how much pain it would have been had you not already been sucking on that fentanyl lollipop.
Oh, as soon as, dude, before I even hit the ground, I was like falling. I was like,
Yeah.
Self-care.
That's funny. Yeah.
yeah.
Slow
No, I
motion.
got the cover and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But by the time I got on the striker, I was, if anybody's been treated by me, they either don't remember it or they got really high and they thanked me for it. So I was pretty generous with
Yeah.
my
So
medication.
High on your own supply,
Yeah, exactly.
literally.
I don't mean that in a way of anything nefarious whatsoever. This is all in just
medicine.
Fun, but,
So when you
Yeah.
got hit, the tourniquet, did you apply the tourniquet yourself? Was it all self-care at that point?
to be honest, I don't remember.
Yeah, I get it.
It was so like by the book. I don't remember if I did or it might have even been First Sergeant Nickel at the time. I honestly don't remember. But if anybody wants to know what it feels like to get shot without actually getting shot, it's almost like somebody punches you as hard as they can in like your funny bone. So it's like that really weird, awkward feeling, and then you take like an iron and burn it. So it's very, very hot. And I got over that relatively quickly. The adrenaline kicked in, and I was like, oh, this isn't so bad. But the hours after, where your muscle is just trying to swell and your skin wants to pop, that was probably the worst.
Yeah.
That hurt really bad.
Yeah.
That was unpleasant.
So back on Rear D doing staff duty
Again.
Yeah.
How was rehab for you? Like being shot in the foot, like there's a lot of bones in there that you can.
I actually missed them. Yeah, I got so lucky, man.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, like, I don't think you could set it up and do it again. So on the top of my foot, the bullet came right in and like just went over all my bones. It went right out the other side.
Wow.
So I was a pretty lucky cat.
Yeah.
So
These were
I was
Kalashnikov
supposed to
rounds?
do. Yeah.
Shit, man. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, because that's not common. Usually, they'll mushroom up and just take everything out. 'Cause there's a lot of velocity behind those. But I got lucky.
Did you did you tell Smith and Wesson that their knife potentially saved your life?
You bet your butt I did. And then they sent me like 20, 30 knives.
I bet you. I was wondering if they did. Yeah.
Yep, sure did. They sent me a bunch of knives, so good on them.
That's
I also
fantastic.
got a Schreider knife, so I'm trying to remember where I got it. It was one of the RRD guys knew the person that made them, but I can't remember who actually gave it to me. But anyways, they gave me a nice, like handmade knife. It was just, it was really cool.
Yeah.
So you're getting better. What's that process to recovery and to getting back out on the job?
Well, so when it comes to myself, probably and my family, I'm the worst medic possible. So I just went straight into, well, it's not musculoskeletal anymore. I didn't break any bone with it. There's no fracture there. Might as well just, start running, start getting back after it. So probably within a few weeks, I was getting back after it. And then I went to SERE school probably in July, I don't know, 4 or 5 months after getting shot. I went to SERE school.
You should be checked into a mental institution, Mike. What the hell?
Well, I mean, yeah, I had an opportunity to go to SERE school. I'm going to go to SERE school. So it just seemed like the right thing to do.
Rangering through it. That's awesome.
Yeah, pretty much. And looking back, it was stupid because I pay for it now.
Yeah.
Not that it would have made a difference back then, but as a medic now, knowing what I know now, for all you people out there listening, physical therapy, occupational therapy, don't mess around. Do it right. And it'll make a lasting difference on your recovery and your life after, for sure.
So how did you get a slot for SERE school from Ranger Battalion? Because was that part of a recce thing? Because that's not normal for Rangers.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't remember. Kyle Andrus, another great friend of mine, still great friends. He was like a school guy. So it may have been through that. But it was also Rear D, and I don't remember who was on. It might have been Bishop, Sergeant Major Bishop, that was Sergeant First Class at the time. I think he was running the 3 shop, and they were like, "Hey, we need folks for SERE school," and it wasn't directed at me at all. But I was like, "I'll go."
Yeah.
Yeah, SERE school. Shit. Yeah, I'll volunteer. I'll put my hand up for that.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Yeah.
SERE's like SERE's like scuba, where it's like, okay, who wants to volunteer? And everybody takes a step back.
Yeah. No, I mean, I thought it was a pretty good school. It is what it is. But it was one of those things that, my team sergeant and Recce at the time had been, and so they would talk about it, and it's just like, I hate not knowing, so I wanted to knock it out.
Yeah.
And so what happened after SERE school?
Mosul deployment. Yep. So I went to Mosul. I was still an HHC senior medic, and I was a task force senior medic for this area. So we had Bravo Company, second platoon. That was Ray Barrett's platoon at the time. Pete Van Gel was the platoon leader. We had them up in Mosul, and I think as a Ranger medic, that was probably one of the most devastating deployments. It was just, man, it's like almost every day for the first couple of weeks we were taking casualties, and it was pretty rough.
This was 2007, 2008 time frame.
Yep, it was Christmas. Yes, it was fall of 07 into 08 because we were there for Christmas. Yep.
Yeah. So tell us about it.
Yeah. It was, yeah. Just looking back, it was a pretty crazy deployment. Ben Dillon, he was killed on the first op out there, who I named my son after. But that was imagine, you're deploying as a strike force and everybody, you're amped up. It's Mosul. You got a high five from the previous battalion that said, yeah, it's been pretty rugged. And, you're getting ready for that. And the first op out, we lose a Ranger. And it's just like, dang, you lose momentum before you even had it.
Yeah.
Right. That was a pretty heavy, heavy loss.
Yeah. Kind of takes the wind out of your sails for a second.
Yeah, it does. It really does. And I think as a medic, it was probably one of the most challenging experiences I had at the time. I had Jeremy Marks with me, which dude's an orthopedic surgeon now. I couldn't be any more proud of him. Even when he was a Ranger medic, he was just always a sponge learning, just probably one of the best, better Ranger medics I've worked with. He was their platoon medic, and he was, I think that hit him pretty hard too. So him and I we worked together on that op, and unfortunately the outcome wasn't what we'd all prayed for, but
Yeah.
it was a pretty heavy loss.
Now you've done multiple deployments, and we talked a little bit about like sort of the emerging TCCC care, the technology, like prosthetics were growing. You had the quick clot, like you had all these things coming out. How were you guys managing that from trip to trip?
Yeah, so we had worked with the JMAL on CTM. So we would go to Fort Bragg and the training area out there. And so we would be trained up every once in a while, going with them, which is just like, at the time, was just like, wow, you've got the best docs, nurses, people in the Department of Defense training us up on kind of the latest and greatest. And that really kind of opened my eye to the organization. I'm sure we'll talk about that later, but and they would really work with us on actual medicine. And so what we didn't already know, we continued to compound and learn, and we had that institution and organizational knowledge there. And we also had the Special Operations Combat Medic Skills Sustainment course, SOCM. Every 2 years, we would go back to Fort Bragg to do our medical refresher with the 18 Deltas, PJs sometimes, the SARCs, the corpsmen, SEAL medics, whoever, BA 160th, all the medics go back there for a refresher. So we were constantly kind of pushing that envelope as much as you can. And I know for me, I was pretty much experimental sometimes when it came to that stuff. Not on, experimental and not a morbid way. Like right. I would use cutting edge, newer stuff that was out instead of kind of reverting back to what everybody always does. So like with, doing interosseous instead of IV. When you're trying to get an IV started to push blood on a combat casualty that's already lost a lot of blood, it's really hard to do. So why not just go interosseous into your bone? So I was just really aggressive when it comes to stuff like that. So I think because of the job, we had to advance and we had to be on it. And we had the institutional knowledge from the organization at the Ranger Regiment, because we would come together as a regiment with the training as far as medics are concerned. But then we had the non-organic stuff from SOCMS and from the JMAL. And so I think that really forced medics to mature a lot faster than they would have if they just went to normal refreshers and stuff like that. So I hope that answers your question.
It does, and I actually, just because of sort of the medical geek in me, like I studied trauma medicine when it was twin IVs, bolus, which is not a thing anymore, right?
No, you kill people now.
Yeah, exactly.
So if anybody's listening, you're pushing fresh whole blood. And if you don't have fresh whole blood, you're pushing fresh whole blood. So we're getting away from crystalloids, getting away from all that stuff.
Yeah, so like it's amazing to me how far, and I think we saw the same thing in Vietnam, and every war really, we see this surge in medical knowledge. But so
yeah, I mean, we used tourniquets in the Civil War, and then we stopped using tourniquets, and then we used them again in World War II, and then 58,000 people killed in Vietnam, and we stopped using it. Like, we do it and then we stop.
Right.
And I think that's because we didn't have a committee of TCCC. We didn't have the joint trauma. We didn't have an entity that said we have to hold this knowledge. We have to continue to develop this training and this capability.
Right. And
we do have now.
And the old wisdom with tourniquets, and please correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I know the old belief with tourniquets is you put it on and it doesn't come off, which obviously risks the limb. But then wasn't it sort of developed that actually you can, at certain increments, release it?
Yeah, they went through this time period where it was called like milking a tourniquet, which would be medics or above only for the most part. But, there's some dangers with that too, because you've got, compartment syndrome that could be developing. You've got toxins in there. Your blood's going through an anaerobic metabolism the whole time. So anytime you open up a tourniquet and you release all that into your normal bloodstream, you're going to have an effect. So you have to be prepared for that.
Right.
Treat it almost like a crush injury or something like that.
Yeah.
So But for the most part, what we know now is if you do put a tourniquet on, as far as saving a life, I'm not talking about, maybe they might lose a little bit of sensory or reflex or whatever. But if you put a tourniquet on, even for a few hours today, and you get them to a higher standard of care, their outcome would be pretty good. Even regularly, as we do surgery, we put tourniquets. They're a little bit different. They're not your 1 or 2 inch windlass style tourniquet. They're usually a pneumatic wide tourniquet, which takes less pressure to get occlusion. They'll do that when we're just operating on somebody's arm or leg or something like that. So, and they've been known to do that for hours. But there was the thought process back in the day. You put a tourniquet on high and tight, and you kind of move on. And thankfully, we've moved away from that a little bit. I think it's a good mindset to put a tourniquet on when you need one, but it needs to be addressed, because some folks are getting a tourniquet that might not need one, or got a tourniquet in the wrong situation, and it either costs death or disfigurement. So I think we could just do better than that now.
And then with medical technology at the time, it's obviously advancing too, because you mentioned like going from giving an IV to intraosseous. Like, so you're putting an IV, like, how do you know? I mean, obviously very smart people figure this out, that you can replenish bodily fluids by sticking a needle into the bone. But now, are there new needles coming out? Are there like new vendors and things like that are?
Yeah, of course. And I deal with that now. So I work for Safeguard Medical now, which is a pre-hospital trauma device manufacturer. And I say that because that didn't exist when I became a medic back in the day. We would take Curlex, which was for a hospital. We would take Atrap, which was for a hospital. We would take these needles, which were for a hospital, and we would use those in a austere environment. But now we have companies who are listening to what these folks out there, austere medics, are saying, and now they're making kit and equipment for that application. So we had to use a lot of non-standard stuff. So even with IO, interosseous, we were using interosseous in the field or in an environment where it had never really been used before. So it's been, IO has been around for a very long time, but it wasn't really used in a pre-hospital environment. It was used in a hospital for somebody who's, got doing chemo, or they've lost a lot of weight because of cancers and stuff like that. So it's kind of off-label use for a lot of the stuff we were doing.
It's fascinating. I mean, it's just really fascinating to me. And I'm sorry for everybody out there who's bored by this, but it's just incredible.
Nerd.
Yeah. It's incredible.
And it's like I mean, I think what's so interesting about it is that it's this very like practical, pragmatic application of medical science in the field that maybe you don't find anywhere else.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's a testament of our surgeons and our PAs and all those folks who just continue to push. Even on a deployment, you're just took a casualty, you drag them to cover, and you got a PA standing right over your shoulder. That's like, yep, you're doing it right, man. You got it. Like, they would mentor you while you're doing it. And it just, I don't think you see that anywhere else.
Yeah, man. Ranger medics are on point.
And that's why I say that, like, overtrained and underqualified, like, there's no job in the civilian world that compares to a combat medic. There, like,
not even close.
Not a paramedic, you're somewhere between paramedic and trauma surgeon.
But while being shot at.
But even the things that you are capable and allowed to do in the military, there's no space in the civilian world to accommodate that.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And not to take away from any other folks' jobs out there, but it's not like, when I go out there, I'm trying to do the job of a PA. I'm not trying to do the job of the surgeon. I'm just trying to do the job of the Ranger medic. And, for whatever reason, I can shoot, move, communicate with my Ranger platoon. Maybe this PA or this doc can't. So I need to be able to take what they're learning. I got to take, their skill set and apply that in an environment that they either can't get to or don't have access to. So, and we've been lucky in the regiment to where it never came down to, a PA or a doc, like, looking at us like, if I can't be there, you're not doing that. Like, I've literally been, on the comms talking with Colonel Cotwall, who I'm about to push this medication. Yeah, roger that. Go ahead. So we had that access, to giant brains in a firefight, literally. So I think that's that's definitely a pillar for success for the resident.
So
I just want to ask one more
Yeah.
question, if you don't mind talking about this, and feel free to skip it. What was the most challenging scenario you had in a combat situation?
Oh yeah, so that one is kind of tough, kind of tough to talk about. But when there's a loss, so it's not like there's a loss and the op is over. Sometimes there's a loss, and we got to keep going.
Right.
So you've got in when I was a brand new Ranger medic, 1 in 5 people had a radio. Like not everybody even had a radio, so you'd have to like whisper or yell. But later on in years, everybody had a radio. So everybody down to the private who's about to kick down that door and do justice here. So when you get the call or I'm treating a casualty or whatever, and somebody's like, hey, what's the status? You really have to be methodical about how you translate that over the comms, because it can really destroy the momentum in that battlefield aggression very quickly. So I think that was probably my biggest challenge was being able to keep everybody moving. And I think standing up to some of the platoon sergeants, sometimes you have to be like, hey, I've got this. You keep going. Your focus is over there. And some of them were phenomenal at it. But some of them wanted to be, they needed that intel. And it's like, you don't. Like, I'll tell you what his status is when you need to know what his status is. Because I know that that's going to affect that. So I kind of had to like pull that apart and kind of be a prick about it. But we had to maintain that focus. And so I think that was probably one of the harder things to deal with.
So yeah, you did this deployment to Mosul during the height of the surge. What was the next step after that?
Yeah, that was pretty tough deployment. After that, was another Afghanistan deployment. And this one was, it was Afghanistan deployment, and that was fall of 2008, I think.
Okay.
And nothing really too remarkable from this deployment. I think there was, at this time, the mortar platoon, not that it's like exciting. I think it's kind of cool, but the mortar platoon at the time, they used to have mortars attached to the platoons, sections, whatever, but they actually went out as an organic platoon. So I thought that was
Really?
Yeah, they did a hell of a job, man. They did a great job. They had a great medic at the time. They had 2 medics. They had really two great medics. And
Were they going out to do indirect fire or going out to act like a
no,
line
they were
platoon?
going out as a platoon, as just a normal. Well,
Really?
As like a line
Within
line
reason.
team, a line squad.
That's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Wow.
So, I know they would do a lot of blocking position type stuff for the other platoon, but they would go
Cool.
out there and I was so proud of them. I say that because a lot of them were really good friends of mine.
Thank
So
you.
it was really cool to see where they went and how they got there.
That's pretty cool, man. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it was also my first deployment, kind of working with PSYOP and CA. I'd worked with them a little bit, and then working with asymmetric warfare, kind of working with them a little bit. So it was a pretty interesting deployment where I learned a lot more about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Things are bigger than just 3rd Ranger Battalion.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty cool.
CA going out there and trying to like
Dig a well.
patch up what Ranger Battalion or SEAL teams had just been in and did.
And they did a great job too.
Yeah.
So, we had Ranger Rick Merritt. I love the man, and he had told us one time. I think it actually was in Mosul at the time. We would have young Ranger privates. We'd come in, we'd clear a room. They're just knocking everything over, just doing TSD, finding everything. And I'm pretty sure it was Rick Merritt that was like, "Hey, man, what you're doing right now could be generating the next batch of terrorists." And we're like, well, that kind of makes sense. We come in here and just zip this dude up. His kid probably just watched it. So like, you kind of have to be a little bit more, I don't know,
Tactful.
focused. Yeah, a little bit more tactful. And I think
Yeah.
that's where CA came in behind the scenes, and really kind of patched that up. And I think they did a good job.
Yeah. So for people who might not know, when we say CA, we're talking about civil affairs, which is really, we always say SF is the hearts and minds, but civil affairs is really hearts and minds.
Check out our past interviews with Joshua Lees.
Yeah. Yeah, for
He was
sure.
a CA guy.
That
I thought they were phenomenal NCOs in my experience with them. And I think there was also a difference when I started working or being around CA anyway. They were former Ranger, former SF, like they had been in the community and then kind of shifted to CA, where now CA has its own pipeline. And I haven't really worked with them since that's happened. So when I worked with their medics, they had all been somewhere. And so they were just phenomenal medics. So I learned quite a bit.
That's cool.
And one of the things that like the CA medic, like they are out there like taking in villagers a lot of times and treating, illnesses and injuries that these people have had for a long time sometimes.
Yep, and they were doing stuff, I just never really been exposed to. I've been, at that time I was exposed to like, crotch rot, just your basic, hey, I just returned from a TDY, doc, can you hook me up?
Right, I need a shot.
Into like, and
family vaccination.
Like, exactly. We're kidding.
Yeah, kidding. Right.
But we're working with animals and children and babies, and I took every opportunity to go out there with the CA medics because it was a good opportunity to learn to just this different piece of being a medic.
Like at that time, and I don't know if it's true or not, but the Ranger medics did the assault portion of SOCM, whereas the SF medics got like, oh, there's a typhoid outbreak in the village, so it's a different.
And this is how you treat the water in your well.
So they go on to SFMS, which some Ranger medics are able to do as long as they go to one of the SMUs, and there's a way to do that. But anyways, so they go on, and there's like a surgical block, and there's just a lot of things that you don't generally see in the regiment. So I think Ranger medics could benefit from it for sure, but if you had the opportunity to go to Jump Master or something else that would benefit the regiment, that probably would make sense. And that pissed me off at the time because I didn't understand why. I was like, I'll re-enlist to go to the second part. At the time, I liked medicine and I was into it, so I was like, hey, I want to do this. I'm gonna do it right. But there's literally like I guess no way to do it. Like so it can't compute. So
Ranger Regiment wasn't that concerned about your veterinary skills.
No. Despite me wanting to learn.
So what was the next step in your career path after that one?
So I ended up going to the JMAL, but I was at the 528 for a little while under Steve Cody, who was like the first sergeant. He's retired now, which was kind of the dumping ground. Not dumping ground is like a bad thing, but it's kind of where a lot of the soft medics went to kind of take a knee or whatever. So I was in the 528 for a little while, but didn't really, nothing really notable there. But then I assessed and went to the JMAL.
Tell us about that, because I think this is like, as far as public perception is, it's a kind of obscure element that not too many people know about. Can you tell us what that element is and how you assessed for it?
Sure. Yeah. So my previous experience with the organization, all I really knew was, their PA, surgeons, surgical team. And every time we would do some kind of mission planning brief, I had to include these guys, but I didn't really know what they did. And I still didn't, even when I assessed for the organization, I still didn't really know it. I knew they did damage control surgery and damage control resuscitation, but I didn't really understand like who they were, where they picked them from, how they got there, I didn't know any of that. But I knew people that were there, and I knew the unit sergeant major at the time. Love the guy. I've known him for so many years. But anyway, so I ended up assessing, and it was more of like just a psychological type thing. And your medicine. It's not something that you would, it's not going to be like, a 40-mile ruck with 7 days of land. It's just that's not what you do in that organization. So that's not really what's expected of you. So it's more of medicine, and can you handle extremely high stress situations and be in positions where you might be by yourself, orchestrating national mission force type assets. So that was a huge eye-opener. So going into there, just within the first couple weeks, was just one of the most overwhelming, anxious experiences probably my whole career, because of this secrecy and, nobody really knows anything at that time. So you couldn't just Google it at the time. I don't know if you still can, but it was pretty good. And I think I went in there with the mindset of, I never joined the military to be like, hey, the military is going to make me better. I joined the military hopefully that I have something to give to this organization. That's like my American thing to do. And so, my brother, my older brother, he was a wrestler. And, he always taught me when I was wrestling, like, find the strongest guy, find the fastest guy, and he's heavier than you, and wrestle him. He's going to make you a better wrestler. Which, come to find out, was always my brother. He's phenomenal, and I suck. But I went in there with that mindset of, let me find these surgeons and these CRNAs and these docs, and let me just absorb everything that they've got to say, and just try to make myself a little bit more capable. And what can I learn from them? And it was just so overwhelming, because everything I had talked about when I was at the 68 whiskey course, they said, brain dump all that when I got to SOCM. And then when I got there, I really had to brain dump a lot of stuff that I learned in regiment, because it just wasn't applicable. And the medicine was good, but the medicine was a Band-Aid. So that's when I really learned that any casualty you treat on the battlefield, for the most part, you're preparing them for surgery.
Right.
So instead of just putting that tourniquet on and forgetting about it, now that's why we're pushing fresh whole blood. That's why we're trying to get them high, and that's why we're trying to keep them warm, because by the time they get to a surgeon, they're expected to be warm, high, already have an airway, so they can get to work. So it was very drink it through a fire hose, and it's very different. When we studied for Jump Master, it was more of like just reading this piece of paper and, just remembering the nomenclature. But for this, I'm reading white papers, and I have to make a decision, like, why would I put TXA versus this, or why would, you have to actually learn. And that's what these doctors and that's what they do. They don't just see, the Ranger Medic Handbook and it says, well, push TXA because of this. Like, they learn why you're doing that. And I was able to do that in that organization. And it was, it profoundly changed my mind as a medic on how I do pretty much everything.
So JMAL is Joint Medical Augmentation Unit. And can you tell us, just for people who don't know, because we imagine that they go from the field medic, get medevaced, and go to a MASH unit, but that, or whatever. But can you tell us the role that the JMAL fills?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, it's actually the Joint Medical Unit now, or JMU.
Okay.
So their goal is, there's unclassified, special operations resuscitation teams, special operations surgical teams in the Air Force, and even forward resuscitation surgical teams in the Army. Like, those already exist. And what they're trying to do is get the surgery as close to the casualty as possible. Because really, we want to get the casualty out, to that higher echelon of care. But sometimes that's not possible, especially with Tier 1 special missions units. They're going in the middle of nowhere, and they can't just show up at a theater hospital at 02 Zulu with combat casualties. So we would get the JMAL medics, the JMAL team, their SRTs would get as close to the action as possible, and whatever aircraft they're on or whatever would now become that OR. So casualties would be treated by the Ranger medics or the SMU medics, whoever it is. They would be handed off to them, and that's pretty much where they would do surgery, right there. And then they would deliver to the next echelon.
So the Ranger combat medic, if I'm understanding this rightly, the Ranger combat medic, the Special Forces 18 Delta, the JSOC assault medic, is sort of the front line that is then delivering the casualty to this unit.
Yep, pretty much. Yep, and where they deliver that to the unit is, as close as possible. So whether that's, aircraft that are just, loitering around or whatever. So it's pretty phenomenal to see. It's pretty, surgery in itself is pretty stressful, even in a bright white lights in an OR, but seeing these dudes, they're just some of the most phenomenal practitioners, I would say, in the world. To just be able to do this with big old dip in under night vision, on their knees with a lanyard hooked in, so that way they can kind of lean back and get a little bit of stability. And it's just I didn't know stuff like that existed.
And perform and not doing the great job that Ranger SF medics or Tier 1 medics do, combat medics, but actually doing full surgeries.
Yeah, brain
Oh
surgery.
yeah, on the actual surgery.
On the move.
Yes. Yep. It's damage control resuscitation and damage control surgery for the most part, which is box and belly. So they're not going to go in there and do like vascular surgery on somebody's leg. I mean, that's not really. They're going to go in there and clamp off vessels to keep, preserve the life.
So tell us,
thoracotomy, such stuff.
What was your first deployment with that unit?
So for the most part, us NCOs, we were going through kind of like identity crisis. So we would do like operations because we knew a lot of people in the communities, and we would understand how the different platforms worked. So I was able to do that, go over as like operations to really learn that battlefield architecture. So there's no benefit in that. So it wasn't as sexy as what I would have thought. But he going over there and just handling like the inner theater assets. So I was able to do that. And then I was farmed out to do like an Omega deployment, which was right back to like the tactical medicine stuff again. And so it's, and then.
Can you tell us about that one?
Oh, go ahead. Oh, yeah. So that one was, I was familiar with the program already. It was, I think, 2014 when I was able to do that. But I went out with the Navy at the time, and we had a small, I know you guys have had Mike Edwards on the show before. So, but yeah, we had a small team going out there just enabling, the assets. So that one there that deployment was probably my most probably uneasy or unnerving deployment, because you're literally like 4 or 5 people, middle of nowhere, like I really had to know my medicine, and I needed to know my theater assets at the time. And so it was very, very sketch.
This ain't Ranger Battalion.
No. It's very big boy. Nobody's checking on you. Nobody's, even in Ranger Battalion for the most part, they'd come back and do PCIs, PCC, all that stuff. And you're kind of just used to that. It's automatic. But here it's like, nobody's checking my aid bag. Nobody's checking what my standard load is. Nobody's, you just have to use common sense at that time. But I mean, I was like a E7 promotable or master sergeant at the time. So I mean, it wasn't really that difficult to transition, but it was pretty good. I was with a good team, and it was a lot more eventful than I probably would have thought.
How would you go about in this remote position? How would you go about getting your loadout? Determining what you needed. Obviously, you know how to determine what you need, but what I mean is, like, if you needed extra stuff that you didn't have, like, how did you go about doing that? Could you walk down to like the not MASH site, but like the field hospital and get it, or how did that work?
I could do that. I think that was one of the magic things of being in the organization is everybody knows everybody. So, I could go to the local place, and this was in Jalalabad at the time. I could go in there and just, nobody was really unaware of SOF folks. So I go in there and they're just like, oh, it's one of you guys, and they were great about it. It was a conventional Army unit. I don't remember who it was, but I think the 101st was in theater at the time. I got anything I possibly needed, but for my personal loadout, I took Mike Hetzler and Balls. They had like I can't remember the title of it, but there's a white paper, or not a white paper. They wrote an article about how to pack an aid bag and how to pack a truck bag and a ruck. And I apologize, I probably should have prepared and wrote it down, but that mindset, and having Mike Hetzler in the organization, of course, trained and prepped us, but having that mindset, I was able to cross-load a lot of my medical stuff amongst the folks I was with. So everybody had narcotics. Everybody, because that's everybody needs narcotics, right? So and everybody had a way to start an interosseous, and I taught them how to do it. Everybody had all the tourniquets and pressure dressings, all the things they needed. And we trained, and I trained, and I trained, and I trained them, and they were pretty receptive to it. They were very good about it. And then I had, my truck stuff that I always have in the truck. And then whenever we'd enter a house, if we had to do that, which we didn't do a whole lot of. Usually we kind of stayed offset a little bit, but I would have, a bag that I would drop for that. So, and then a speedball that, we dropped from a helicopter if we needed it. So I was pretty well equipped for being only a small element.
Yeah.
But my aid bag, when I was with regiment, which is also compounding off either another platoon medic or, somebody else who's one of the infantrymen that's also trained medically somewhat, would kind of be the person who carries some of the other stuff. And everybody's trained at TCCC. You can crossload really well, and you got a striker. You could drop a couple bags in there. You got, there's a lot of room there. But I had to do more one-off stuff. So for me, on a small team, a mass cal is one person. So I kind of had to gear for that. So I wouldn't need 20 tourniquets because that's more than what I could do anyway. So I would prep more for, if I had to do boxer belly or something like that on just one person.
Any memorable operations from that deployment?
Yeah. So there was a couple times where we got pretty big ticks or troops in contact. And one, we actually lost an American advisor on that one there. And it was a mass cal. So the Afghans that we were working with, I think I had 6 or 7 casualties at the time. So I was kind of working with them, and they were what you would think, just graze, and they were like limping. And I'm like, I remember the first time I got shot, so I was kind of irritated with them because they didn't really, they would get hit and just lay down. And I'm like, dude, at least get cover, do something.
We're like Rangers are trained from the get-go. Like you get shot, you keep going even in training until they assess you as a casualty, right?
They would come see me in the aid station later on. They're like, I think I got hit. And you look, and they're like, uniforms torn up. And I'm like, you're an idiot. Yes, you got hit. It does happen. But no, we lost an American on that one. And that was a pretty brutal hit at the time. But we worked through it and, continued mission.
That's got to be rough, man, going a mass cal situation. And, I think it's very interesting, psychological dynamic that you mentioned earlier, that all of this happens, but you got to keep going. The mission doesn't just stop. The firefight doesn't just stop.
Yeah, so that's kind of working through that and making sure that, everybody else is maintaining that focus, while also getting irritated with some of the partner nation that I didn't really, at the time there's so much, green on blue, whatever, I wasn't comfortable working with some of the partner nation, to be honest. So it was just another added thing that I had to worry about.
Right.
So it's just stressful.
One of the things,
and I didn't trust to just hand a casualty off to people I didn't know. So
yeah,
I ended up carrying the litter and handing off to the helicopter that came in. It's just made it a different experience to where, back in the Ranger Regiment, you're treating somebody, you get a couple of Ranger privates, they're carrying the stuff, you hand off to a 160th guy, you know who it is, I've worked with him for years, you hand off, I know he's good to go. But now you're working with people you've never seen before, putting them on an aircraft where you vaguely know who's on it. It's just not comfortable.
Yeah, and one of the things you mentioned earlier was how sometimes a platoon sergeant would stop and overlook and want to know the status. But sometimes with Indige, an entire group of guys would stop. Just stop to see if their buddy was fine.
We had, I had a couple folks on the ground that helped out with the crowd control, so they were able to divert really well. So that was just one less thing that I had to worry about.
Yeah.
So, Mike, I remember, and I'd love to ask you this. I remember you may have mentioned to me that you got spun up for a counterterrorism deployment during your time at the unit.
Yeah, so I did. It was the whole Benghazi thing there. So, as part of our mission was also, just kind of be prepared to get our surgical teams. And being in the unit's not only about surgery, it's also about that inner theater operations, getting folks where they need to go, back to Germany or wherever. But yeah, the Benghazi, that went off, and I reported to work, and, because it was a page or a phone call or whatever. And usually, we would train, and, I wasn't sure if this was like a real thing or not, but oh yeah, I was on a C-17 headed to Sigonella, Italy, pretty quick. So that was my first time doing kind of that kind of blowout for real. So it was also kind of a nervous thing because we didn't really know a whole lot of what was going on. I'm sure you've seen the movie 13 Hours. This is far removed from like the movie.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say like it is what it is. The movie's pretty accurate, by the way. But at the time, we didn't know any of that was really going on. The intel we got, we were already starting to develop, targets and stuff like that. So that was just it was a different experience when you take off an aircraft and you have no clue where you're landing.
Mm-hmm. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you got enough, you got pallet load of equipment that could literally go anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
So you're kind of prepared for it. But it's, it's kind of
but it's great that capability exists, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And at the time, did you, because you're senior enlisted right now, you're in this like legit tier 1 unit. Did you not know where you were going because the pilots didn't brief you, or because the pilots didn't know, like everything was so in flux, like decisions were being made while you guys were in the air?
Yeah, decisions were definitely made while we were in the air. As we got closer, we knew where we were going.
Yeah.
And we could start developing a plan. But at the time, there wasn't, we didn't know much. I think that the news and the media at the time was saying, there was uprising because of a political cartoon or something.
Because of the video.
It was on the on the anniversary right after September 11th. So that was bad intelligence. That was not correct. So.
Yeah. And so when you got to Sigonella, because, everybody in the military has been subject to the hurry up and wait, syndrome. What was it like when you guys got to Sigonella?
Yeah. So, we're going 1,000 miles an hour. We do what we do. We've perfected the art of setting up, tear down, set up, tear down. So we got there, we set up, ready to go no matter what we need to do. I started making local connections with hospitals if we needed to bring somebody back, or we needed to move an OR over there. We started making, starting to meet the other assets that we had in country to kind of figure out where we could push people around if we had to. So the first couple of days was like 2 hours of sleep, Ranger school, falling asleep, just trying to figure out who's doing what we're doing. If, this organization launches and does this, how would we support that? So it was a bunch of ants making a ant hill for the first couple of days.
Yeah. Now, when, one of the things we see sometimes with special operations units is, like there are conventional theater, owners or owners of a certain area, and they may not always like what the special operations units are doing there, and there can be a bit of a rub. When you guys fly into a place like Sigonella, and obviously you have, not saying anything bad about doctors or surgeons at any given military base, but 50% of doctors were at the bottom of their class, right? Like 50% of them. So you
That's
never know.
Accurate.
So you never know what you are getting in any one location. And when you guys fly in, do you have the authority to sort of commandeer a surgical room and say, anybody coming from this is ours?
Yeah, so I don't know about the authority to do it, but we go in there and lack of, like, I want to, tell you guys that we go in there and kick down doors and hold a Glock to somebody's head, but like, man, we walk in there and it's like a naval unit, and they're like, we know why you're here. So I'm in plain clothes, and I just walk in there. They're like, we know why you're here. What do you guys need? And so I don't know if that was just that specific naval unit that was helping us out, but I really didn't have any issues with that whatsoever. They said, whatever you guys need, it's yours. So they were pretty good.
That's fantastic. Yeah, because I didn't know if maybe like, some chief of medicine to be like, this is our hospital and you guys, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, I'm sure it's happened.
Yeah.
But I've been fortunate to where I was able to sweet talk just about anybody to get whatever I needed.
Yeah.
So, and what came? I mean, just following the chronology. I mean, what came after that whole Benghazi situation?
Oh, a whole lot of nothing. We sat there, did nothing. So, I don't try not to get too political, but we had. I personally think that we had targets. We had a show of force that we were willing, ready, and able to do, and we did not. So, it sucks.
Yeah.
And I say it sucks. Like, of course, no more American lives were put in jeopardy or harmed or anything. So that's a good thing. But I think we could have done more.
Yeah, and it, it's not just any special operations in that theater, but special operations in other areas. And I can't remember the unit in Sigonella, the Airborne unit, which is supposed to be there for a lot of the in extremist stuff.
You're talking about.
Well, we had Charlie 110 from SF. They were in Stuttgart, I believe. So they met us in Italy pretty quick.
Yeah.
So they had assets there. We had some folks from the 528, which luckily I did a little time there, so I integrated them really quickly. But as far as like conventional infantry, I don't think they had a whole lot. They had like a Marine rifle platoon that might have been in somewhere in Northern Africa, but we didn't have a whole lot where we were at. They have the 173rd, but I don't think they were not there.
Yeah.
Oh, they weren't
No.
in Italy?
They were not at our location.
They weren't at your, okay. All right.
So what came after that? What was the next thing for you?
More ops deployments, most of my time in the unit was training and training other people. So I did a lot of training the newer teams that would assess and get selected, and we eventually developed a pretty good selection process that helped make it so we can test them physically, mentally, emotionally in some cases, to ensure that they were the right fit for the organizations that were going out. Just because they're a good surgeon doesn't mean that they're fit to be in that remote environment. So I worked a lot with that and just running the day-to-day operations, the jumps and all that stuff. So that's why I was saying we went through kind of like a change of where we did a lot of ops, and then we did tactical medicine stuff where we worked with the surgical resuscitation teams a lot, and then we moved into like doing other administrative stuff. So I also did like counter-proliferation, so a lot of NVC, doing cool. Like live agent training, doing all that kind of stuff too. So a very broad kind of stuff. But I think as a medic and organization-wise, it was just every single day you're learning something.
Yeah,
new.
that's like
also.
It's like a whole other field of medicine when you get into the NBC stuff, but like assessing like someone who's exposed to sarin or like somebody who's exposed to like a radiological device.
Sure. Yeah, no, it is very different. And we were able to go up to Canada to do some live agent training and stuff because we don't really do that in the U.S. But it was definitely a big eye opener at just learning. The LD50 is the least lethal dose of a chemical that will kill 50% of the population in a given amount of time. Like, a grain of rice size of this chemical will kill somebody. It's kind of crazy, but it also opens your eyes to spot movie fakes, which me and my son do all the time. We're like, that's not true. So when you watch like The Rock and he's like, you're gonna stab this in your heart, that's not how that works. So
yeah, but it's so good though.
Yeah, it's like this is VX gas and it melts your face. It's
right.
That's not what it does. So
right.
It's kind of cool to learn all that kind of stuff and also work with the different tiers and what would they do, because Korea was kind of a thing and we didn't really know. NBC was kind of ramping up a little bit, so it was an eye opener because it's not sexy. As a medic, we're like trauma. You're doing this. I'm doing chest tubes and I'm criking and you're doing all this stuff, and now it's like you're doing atropine and physostigmine and Valium. It's just like not, it's not cool, but it's stuff you just got to know.
Did you ever find it because like some of the things that I learned about like the NBC stuff, and then sometimes how easy it is, or like were you ever just terrified, like, wow, like how have we not been hit by this stuff?
Well, no, actually, the smarter you get on it, the more you realize that it's not as easy to do as you'd think.
Really?
Yeah. So, it's not as easy as just, VX gas. We're going to throw it in a missile. A lot of these chemicals, they boil at room temperature.
Right.
So it doesn't become, it's not as easily used as weaponized, if you will. So it's, I guess the more you learn, the more you realize things just aren't as.
It's very hard to actually pull off.
It can still hurt you. It can still hurt you, of course.
Right.
But I was more concerned in biological agents. That still freaks me out. We see what happened with COVID.
Right.
COVID could very easily be a biological agent.
Right.
But when we're talking about nerve agents and stuff like that, it's.
Well, you're talking about like dirty
chemistry.
bombs and even like EMPs. Like they're not quite as effective as like the movies would have us believe.
No, they're really not. I think that in modern warfare, we just don't see it that often. I think the only time that I know of in the soft community that we had to deal with that was folks that treated children who had walked through some of the poppy fields in Afghanistan, where they were exposed to some of the chemicals that they'd used that were very similar to the nerve agent poison, as organophosphate poisoning. And so kind of identifying that and treating it almost the same way. So that happened. And then there was chlorine that had, I think happened in Iraq a few times where they tried to do like chlorine bombs and stuff
ISIS
like that.
did that too.
Yeah. That's pretty dirty.
The invasion of Iraq with the whole Islam al-Sharia group, if I recall correctly, northern Iraq, suspected to have a chemical weapons factory. They dealt with it there too.
Yeah, it's it's just not something that I remember on my first deployment. We had you had your pro mask on your side, and you deploy with that. Use it for a pillow, and then it eventually became like I don't even know where my pro mask is. Oh, and also I did learn a lot. So with relaxed grooming standards, you can get a seal on a pro mask, and they have a PAPR, positive air pressure pump, that helps push positive air into your mask. So all these people that are saying you can't have a beard with a mask that's not true.
I think that's just an excuse to make it so you can't have a beard.
And it excluded our Sikh brothers from military service for so long.
Because I remember, like, obviously in the Army it's like pro mask, but in the Navy, because everybody has to be a firefighter or be on damage control on a ship. Like, it's like, that's why we don't have beards. You can't have beards. You can't have 3-day growth because you won't get a seal on your mask. And it's like, I don't think that's right.
So, Mike, you get promoted to sergeant major. You're up at the top, man.
Oh, yeah.
Did we miss something?
Well, yeah, you did kind of. So I ended up taking a knee. So it was time to leave all the that stuff. And I talked to Dennis Smith, who was former first sergeant of 375 back in the day. And he was the ARTB, Airborne Ranger Training Brigade sergeant major. And so I was able to get back to Fort Benning, and I was going to be one of the Airborne School first sergeants or whatever. So just take a knee, kind of stop deploying for a little bit, focus on my mental health. But I ended up going back and being like the senior medic for the Airborne Ranger Training Brigade, and then they put me in the position to be the HHC first sergeant. So I did that for a little while, working at Ranger School, which, believe it or not, was one of my best assignments. More so for my mental health for sure, but the predictability and being part of something that's not medical, because it's something I talk about a little bit, but throughout my career, with all the loss and all the things I saw, it was kind of nice to step away from medicine for a little while. Just kind of take that break and just kind of hit the reset button. And some people, they're diehard into medicine. I don't feel like I am. I was diehard into being a Ranger medic. I was diehard into being a medic, but I wasn't really diehard into medicine in itself. So stepping aside, but still being with the infantry and still being with maneuver, I actually enjoyed it.
Was that like
met a lot of
motivating
great
to
people.
work with young soldiers going through this arduous training?
Yeah, it was very different. And I took it head on, being a very different assignment. And man, I don't know, just seeing these young kids come through, and obviously, my uniform at the time was, pretty, had a lot of stuff on there or whatever. But so they would see that, and they instantly would, asking questions or this or that, and well, you're a medic, why are you in this position or that or whatever, and just being able to mentor those folks, I thought was really good to see, how stupid a Ranger student can be, but how remarkable they can be and how funny they can be. It was a great opportunity, and working with a lot of the RIs, a lot of the senior TAC folks, and it was a phenomenal part of my career.
I'm curious, had Ranger School changed much between the time you went through and the time you became Cadre?
Kind of. So one of my biggest discontents, and of course, I went in there with, I had the full soft mindset of, Ranger School is still archaic in Vietnam, and it pissed me off, to be honest with you, because it wasn't different. So look at all these lessons learned, and I think being a medic, kind of like it, I don't know, it kind of set me up for failure in that, because we always take the things we learn from combat and make sure that we incorporate that into our training, and make sure that we report our casualties back to the joint trauma, and it gets back to Committee of CCCC, which then feeds back into SOCM and feeds back into the medical refresher, and medics are better tomorrow because of what we went through yesterday. And at Ranger School, we had this amazing opportunity of what do we learn in Iraq? What have we learned in Afghanistan? To at least apply it to the training. And then some folks are like, wow, it's just a leadership school. And I kind of disagree with that. Ranger School, when it began, was supposed to prepare people for this guerrilla warfare type environment that they were going to be in. And so it's not necessarily a leadership school. I know it uses leadership as a means to evaluate, but what if somebody went to Ranger School and maybe you didn't pass? Did you go back to your unit with something that's going to save somebody's life?
Right.
Whether that's survivability or lethality. Like, are you going to go back and it's going to do something? Probably not. So I think that was probably one of my biggest discontents, was they didn't take the lessons learned from actual combat and find a way to incorporate that into Ranger School. And I don't know where they are now. Maybe they have now, but unfortunately, I
And
think
do you
they
mean
missed the mark on
when you
that.
say that? Do you mean in terms of the way we actually tactically do combat on the ground or treat wounds on the ground, or in the leadership aspect of the way we report these things back, and the way like the whole command and communication structure works?
Yeah, pretty much all of it. So,
Okay.
Even if something as small as making a dang, PowerPoint on, this is your truck annex, but it's not in the back of a Ranger handbook. It's on a PowerPoint, or everybody thinks Rangers, oh, you must be able to shoot good. We don't shoot a single live round at Ranger School. There might be a good opportunity to be able to incorporate that in there. And folks say you can't do it while they're doing it at RASP. Yes, you can. So I think showing that small unit tactics and teaching people the small unit tactics stuff that comes directly from the regiment. Maybe some of the SMU stuff doesn't apply. Maybe it does, but you can't tell me a rifle platoon in the 82nd can't benefit from sniper theory. Where do I even put a sniper? Where do I put, where should I put these folks? Where should I do this?
Right.
Or I have to report up higher. I have to do this. There's so much more that they have to do that I wish somebody that graduated from Ranger School could go straight to, that position and enable that element so much better than they do now. And the reason why I know it's kind of outdated is, and this used to piss me off too, and a lot of things piss me off. But like, why isn't like MARSOC saying Ranger School? Before you can get a MARSOC position, you need to go to this school. Why isn't SF saying before you can be an 18 Bravo on my team, you're going to this school? They have this opportunity to where it can be a great school to teach people things they can't learn anywhere else. But unfortunately, everything you learn at Ranger School, you can get from the Ranger Handbook. Like it's not teaching you something you couldn't do yesterday.
Right.
versus like Airborne school, I couldn't jump out of a plane 3 weeks ago. Now I can. So I just think they probably could have done a little bit better with that. Maybe even adopt like the RSLIC model where it's more of like your team and you're still using some of the capabilities from the team you came from and kind of using that as a way to enhance the course. And I think there's still measures and ways that they could, we're not creating a course just to make it hard, just to make people fail. That's stupid. As my son says, like when they built the Darth Vader, when they built the dang thing, of course it created a lot of jobs, but like it's the Death Star. So like we don't want to create something that's really hard just for people to fail. I would rather they kind of take a look at Ranger School and create something that, like I said, even if you fail on the last day, you go back to your platoon and you're still value added. I just think they missed the mark.
Do you think that part of that is because, and again, I am not, well, first off, I'm not putting down conventional forces, because in conventional forces, we're out there hooking and jabbing at these little shit fobs and cops out in the middle of nowhere. Like they saw plenty of action. But, when you talk about sort of bringing these lessons into Ranger Battalion, from Ranger Battalion, not all these instructors, in fact, not a lot of the instructors, at least when I went, were from battalion, right? They were tabbed Rangers from, different units. So they might not have that regiment experience coming in to bring in. Do you think because it's a part of TRADOC and open to anybody?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is for sure. And something that I tried to brainchild while I was there is I went to the SF committee, and because we were talking about females coming through Ranger School at the time. So, we wanted to cover, SF, they had already had females in PSYOP and TA. So how did they run their selections? What did they do? How did they, infrastructure-wise, whatever. So while we were there, though, talking to some of their sergeants major was like, what if you treated Ranger School as kind of your SWIC time, where one of their instructors would come here, do their time, they still wear their green hat, they go through RITAP, they're still a certified Ranger instructor, but, and then when you have SF folks come through, you can maybe kind of come up with something that's a little bit more applicable to, the Ranger mission set. So I think there's opportunities where they could have done that. And I think the Ranger Regiment, they could almost do the same thing where, hey, you did your squad leader time, you're not really ready to be a platoon sergeant yet, and it's right here at Fort Benning or Fort Moore, have them come over on loan, because a lot of folks, you don't want to leave the community, because once you leave the community, who knows what's going to happen to you. So I think a lot of people are afraid of that, but people do deserve to take a knee. So if they could come over and have, be like a guest instructor, still do RITAP, still do all that stuff, but you're like on loan or with duty at Ranger School.
Right.
I think Ranger Regiment produces the most Ranger qualified NCOs, or send the most and receive the most. So I think that they should be a little bit more involved with it.
I think there's a difference between, I think, what you and I would like Ranger School to be and what it actually is. Like we have this idea in our mind that it should be a commando school.
Right. Yeah.
Should be. Yeah.
Yeah.
For
And
sure.
I think that's what most people, like civilians, think it is.
But really, as you point out, it's a TRADOC school, and that most of the students are Cherry lieutenants.
Right. IOBC
guys.
Or E6
and privates out of Ranger Battalion.
Right, private, and E6 is from the...
that's the minority.
Yeah.
A minority of NCOs from the conventional force.
Right.
And so Ranger School, like I was definitely, if you talked to me back in the day, I'd be bitter about it. But nowadays, like I can look back on it and see they did a very good job at training us on the basics.
Right.
And
it's a basic leadership school.
And to this day, I could not, even if I wanted to, I could not forget how to set it in an ambush.
Right.
Because they made me do it so many damn times. So it has value. But I don't think you're wrong either, Mike, in pointing out that it could have even more value with some modifications.
Yeah.
I think so. It's just, I'd be dumb to think in the year 2050, like, is it still going to be the same? I hope not. Like, there has to be a point where, we're kind of gravitating towards, something a little bit more applicable. We're seeing drones in Russia and, we're seeing in Ukraine, like, start moving towards a little bit more, modern theory when it comes to things. And it doesn't have to be, a 6-month long tactical course. That's not what you're trying to do. But I just think that they could spruce it up
Well,
a
it
little
may
bit.
have been a 6-month tactical course for some of us.
For some
Mike.
people.
Right, right. Well, and that begs the question: did you go through the last hard course or the first easy course? Because everybody
It was
did
the
one.
last hard one for sure.
Yeah.
Did you have the bayonet assault course?
Yes. We had to break
Okay.
the ice away to do it.
His soul is pure. His soul is pure.
Yeah.
But I think that you pointed out, Jack, that that really Ranger School, like enlisted people can go to Ranger School because there aren't enough officers to fill it out. But it really is an IOBC. It's an infantry officer basic course school, you know, to teach these college kids, you know, sort of small unit and larger unit tactics. You get them kind of up to speed. And it's funny to me though, because like you mentioned, coming from battalion, and it's like when one of these officers getting ready to fail, when they have their first no-go and they're looking at their second, like who do they make their their platoon sergeant and their squad leaders? It's like the Ranger privates. It's like, hey, where are my regiment guys? All right, you guys, get him a pass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
No, for sure.
Well, Mike,
Yeah.
tell us about then picking up Sergeant Major and kind of finishing out your military career.
Yeah, so I was picked up pretty early on. I think I'd, you know, when I was selected, I'd been in the Army 14, 15 years or whatever. So I actually didn't think I'd get picked up. I had been in SOF majority of my career, and I had, you know, the classified NCERs or whatever. So I didn't think that they'd even really read a lot of them. You know, no degree. I didn't have a lot of diversity when it comes to assignments, which is all things that they want you to have. And they say, you're not going to get picked up if you don't. I got picked up right away. So it was kind of a shocker. And then I ended up doing like the online academy, which was, it is what it is. It was, you know,
2 years of
easy, to be
nightmares.
honest with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's well, it sucks too because you're doing the academy, but you're also doing the job of sergeant major. Because as soon as you know I got selected, they were like, "Oh, you're coming here. You're going to do this." So I ended up going to Fort Bragg. I was the chief clinical sergeant major of Womack. So you know you're jumping right into, hey, you've been a soft medic all this time, and then you were at Ranger School, and then now you're in charge of clinical medicine at one of the largest Army hospitals on the East Coast. So it's like I couldn't be any more far removed, but I actually enjoyed it quite a bit because it allowed me to, well, plus I had Uriah Pope, which hopefully you can get him on the show. So he was the sergeant major of Womack at the time, so we just immediately just hit it off. But it was a good opportunity to see what the conventional medics and the conventional medical teams and organizations, how they function and how they did things. And it was actually kind of an eye-opener. So I was pretty blessed to be able to do that. But it came with many headaches. Because my thing was, as a medic, treating my guys, that was my number one job, take care of my guys. And so when I got put in this position, my soldiers were no longer really my job.
Right.
My delivery of healthcare to these beneficiaries, you know, these wives, these husbands, these children, like that became my priority. And so I kind of found myself getting a little bit more aggressive and resentful towards the service and the service members because the delivery of healthcare was vastly substandard in my opinion.
Yeah. I just want to ask you a question because you, in the Army in particular, you wear your DD-214 on your chest, right? Or, you know,
Yeah.
like we love badges. We love, you know.
Yeah.
And you would go into a conventional Army hospital. Does your, like, you know, what does your, like, chest help you, like navigate
the flare or whatever?
Yeah, the flare. Thanks. That's the word I was looking for. Fucking TBI.
Not really. I think most of the people in MedCom, which is, you know, Army Medical Command or whatever, I don't think many of them even knew what half of that stuff was.
Yeah.
Because master jump wing, free fall, CMB, all that, like they didn't know. But I think, you know, where it did make a difference was I would actually do shifts in the ER. And I'd go up to the OR and actually scrub in for surgeries once in a while. So when I go in there and, you know, I got the stethoscope and I'm, a frock sergeant major at the time, and you got this 82nd, PV2 in there with his wife, and he's just like, whoa, like, who's this guy? It's just, I think that was kind of the highlight. I think they were like, yeah, my family's good to go. They're taken care of. And I think that's kind of what it was all about.
Do we have questions for Mike?
Yeah, we have a couple.
I have one here for you. M. Corbin asks, over the last 20 some years, the Rangers have seen it all. Correct me if I'm wrong, but during that time, the Ranger Special Operations combat medics have led the way in innovating and pioneering advanced field medic techniques, such as establishing walking blood banks, which have saved countless lives. What were some of the more counterintuitive things that were learned along the way during these 20 years?
That's great.
No, that is a good question. And of course, I'm biased, but I do think the Ranger medics have light years beyond a lot of the other medics out there. And I've worked close with pretty much every type of medic in all the organizations. But I think the hungry Ranger medic, I think, and it's not just, it has nothing to do with the selection or nothing like that. I just think because they're saturated with that knowledge of the Ranger Medic Handbook and the institutional knowledge, and they have the PA and the surgeons that are there. I've even seen 18 Deltas at our refresher course saying, our surgeon won't even let us do this or do that. And that just blows my mind. You're an 18 Delta. That's crazy. But ours always pushed us harder and pushed the envelope, even when the FDA won't allow it. So when it comes to walk-in blood bank, we're talking about taking blood from that Ranger over there who's an OLO titer and putting it in this Ranger who needs it. And it's not me, the medic, who's doing it, because I have to, if I'm doing damage control resuscitation on this guy, I need an infantryman to draw the blood from that guy, put it in the bag, and then we can administer it to this guy. So, I think that Ranger medics, because of the organization, I think they've been able to push that envelope harder than any other. I think PJs are great. They're good at medicine. They do really well. I think, CA medics are good. 160th medics, phenomenal. They are, but I've never seen another organization where a sergeant major or a first sergeant or a master sergeant or a platoon sergeant would come over and help you do medicine.
Yeah.
And they're good at it because they've been doing T-CCC for 10 years at that time. I think that's what really helps in the surgeons and the PA. I think that's what really helps the organization.
That's fantastic.
So you did say counterintuitive. Did I hear that right? So do you mean something that was not beneficial?
Well, no, something that seemed
unexpected.
That seemed like it wouldn't work but did, or kind of blew your mind that this is actually something that works.
Yeah, I think the fresh whole blood was good. That's changed military medicine for the better going forward. I'd say that's probably the biggest one there. And I think one thing that we had to get people out of the mindset was, I had platoon sergeants that were like, hey, we need to do IV training. And I'm like, no, you don't, because you shouldn't be pushing blood, or you shouldn't be pushing normal saline or crystalloids or whatever. So let's get away from IV training and let's start doing something a little bit more applicable, something I need you to actually do. That took a lot of breaking a culture.
So it's sort of like, why do we need lactated ringers when we have Private Smith right here?
Yep.
That's fascinating.
So for a long time, because, starting an IV is like a technical thing. So infantry folks were like, oh, it's fun. So they wanted to do it. But I'm like, I don't really need you to start the IV. I need you to do this instead. So kind of breaking that culture was a little hard to do.
Yeah. Well, they just wanted it for those Saturday mornings when they were feeling like shit.
Hey, that's what I was there for, man. I would take anybody anytime, day or night, family. I'd come to your house.
Students, bless their souls.
Yeah. Abdi, thank you so much for the very generous donation. We deeply appreciate it. Abdi says, hey, I'm 24, just working as a TCU nurse, wanting to be a 68 whiskey since high school, just stuck in the immigration limbo until then. Thanks, Jack and Dave. You guys helped me. Hey,
thank you,
Abdi. We're rooting for you. I mean, we had Adam Gamal on, talking about his immigration sort of journey and getting into the military and all his stuff, and bringing in immigrants is a phenomenal like it's a phenomenal asset to the military.
Oh, for sure. In my experience, I've worked with several that have done phenomenal. I've met a few from Russia, a few from even Ukraine, and then some of what they call it, the MAVNI program. Is that what they called that back in the day?
I don't
You guys
know.
probably know better than I do. Where the PSYOP folks, they would bring some folks in straight from some of the other countries.
No shit, I didn't know
put them in
that.
uniform. Yeah,
But
they
that's
did
cool.
really well. I thought it was called MAVNI or something like that, but I'd worked with some of those folks. They did a really, really good job.
Yeah, Abdi, we wish you all the best on your journey, brother. Bjorn, thank you very much. How often do CAG medics, 24th STS medics, and JMAL work alongside each other, and how would you characterize their differences tactically and medically? I'm gonna answer part of that for you, so that you don't have to say anything, and we'll just say that tactically, like, they're all medics and they work according to the tactics of the people they're with. So we'll just solve that right there, and then you can answer the rest of it.
No, that's correct. But the 2-4, their medics, they're phenomenal. But you'll find 2-4 medics are typically farmed out, more so when deployed to the other units.
Yeah.
So they work all the time. But when it comes to medicine, once again, it's a small world. So we would share a lot of our stuff, whether it's going through our medical refresher or whatever. We're all side by side and we're sharing that stuff. So nobody likes to hoard that experience. And even at our medical refresher, it would be a time for AAR, or it'd become classified. It would take it from non-classified to classified, close the doors, whatever. And we, if we had to discuss, combat lessons learned.
What do you think, in your opinion, from the time that you were in 2003 or 4 up until, and I mean active, not your guard time obviously, but until you retired, what do you think was the biggest shift in like medical knowledge? What we thought we knew versus what we know.
Yeah, I would say it's probably like the 2005, 2006, 2007 timeframe where, TCCC became prevalent. It was at regiment for a while, but became prevalent everywhere else. And then the conventional force, they dragged their feet for a hot minute when it came to that kind of stuff. So everybody was issued a tourniquet around that time frame. And people started to take ownership of the casualties. So I think around that time frame, because there's been studies showing preventable death on the battlefield, and it's remarkably high. So it's 24 to 26% of combat casualties were potentially survivable. That means if the organization or the service member was trained on putting their own tourniquet on or putting a tourniquet on for the other person, if they could identify and treat attensive physiology or secure an airway, 24% of people potentially could have survived. And that's massive. So, I think around that time, 2005, 2006, the Ranger Medic Handbook was really getting momentum. Committee of TCCC was staffed with some of the greatest minds, and I think that's probably when it really started to develop. And going back to our medical refresher was really aggressive in that time frame. You had dudes coming back like 18 Deltas, SARCs, people coming back with real world experience, and so we really capitalized on that.
Yeah, and for people, because I don't know if we covered, but TCCC is Tactical Combat Casualty Care, right?
Yep, correct. Yep.
Yeah.
And there's an app, the Deployed Medicine app. It's free. It was developed and launched by the Department of Defense. So if anybody has like an Apple, superior Apple product, or Samsung, whatever, you should be able to find it. Deployed Medicine. It has the latest and greatest, most updated information on there, and of course it's free. So check that out.
Got it.
Can't be free. And last one. M. Corbin, thank you very much. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe. Yes, please be sure to hit the like and subscribe.
Check out our Patreon page. The link's down in the description. You can get access to all these episodes ad-free.
So, Mike, where are you at today, and what are you working on?
Yeah, so I'm in Maine. We are going to stay in Maine. So this is kind of my final resting spot. I've been working for Safeguard Medical for a couple of years now. I do new business development. And they're out of North Carolina, a global company. So I'm still able to apply a lot of my, medical nerd stuff there. I've also been working with some folks at Ventus. I'd get you guys some more information if you need it. But I've been working with a lot of folks who have recently separated or are going through the separation, and helping them out with getting access to care issues squared away, whether that's the VA or working with local treatment facilities and stuff like that. And it's been overwhelming to see how many folks are coming back with lung issues. And so I partnered up with the Ventus folks, and it's a respirator that helps filter out a lot of the toxic exposure that we have just from firing a gun. The lead and arsenic, all the different chemicals there. So we're working on that, becoming hopefully a standard issue item for special operations and the conventional forces. If they're going to the range and they're shooting a rifle or doing whatever, they should have this Ventus mask on.
For people who for people who think that they might be having issues, like what is it, but don't know it. Maybe they think I'm just out of shape these days. Like what should they look for? What should they ask the VA to check them for?
Yeah, that's a good question. So typically with the VA, you should be able to get in there and get your basic blood work done. If somebody goes in there and they're like, well, I'm lethargic or whatever, the VA has to look at it as completely new patient, like what could possibly, and doing a whole workup it's going to be a lot of work. And most guys are probably going to have issues with their testosterone when they're getting out, separating, and because of the lifestyle for many years, folks deal with that. Of course, anxiety with dealing with the new environment they're in, depression because they're not doing. That's something I've had to battle with. I used to be top of my game, doing phenomenal things with phenomenal people, and then it just hit the brakes and you're doing something different. So dealing with those kinds of things. So narrowing it down to like one thing is extremely hard to do. But I would always suggest get your vitals, because vitals are vital for a reason. So trend your vitals. If my blood pressure was this last week and it's this week, I can trend that I have high blood pressure. That's pretty easy to do. And get your blood lab, because blood labs don't lie. So if your levels are above normal range or above appropriate or acceptable levels, or they're below, it's easy to see that kind of trigger. But working through some of the other things are going to be a lot less overt. So I would suggest if I've worked with the VA team and they've been great for me, but I said I want to see what my values are. I think my testosterone is low. I want to get it checked. So they've been very great about doing that for me.
And would the VA do testosterone replace, or do they do TRT or HRT?
That's hit or miss in my experience. I've had to go through civilian channels to get my own personal testosterone. With the VA, your acceptable level, depending on that practitioner, it varies, and it's unfortunate because we're seeing a lot of folks that have really low testosterone, and it's kind of affecting their day-to-day life, their quality outlook on life, and the VA, in my opinion, is not doing enough about it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but levels are very different, because if a guy used to have like an 800 or 900, now he has a 500.
It's relative.
If he has a 500, that's going to be low to him, as opposed to somebody who has 300 and used to have 500.
And I'm not an endocrinologist. So somebody's watching and they're like, actually, but but you're absolutely right. It's relative to the person. But generally, if you used to feel this and you used to, be able to do this, and now you're not, that could be a pretty good reason. And then when I personally got on testosterone, it changed my life.
Yeah. And the last question, I'm sorry, but you're such a wealth of knowledge, and we're learning more all the time. We talked about TBIs, and now we're finally starting to realize the effects of blast injuries, breaching, and IEDs, and mortars, stuff like that. How is medicine able to split apart TBI, post-traumatic stress, operation, like these things, or is it just a big soup where they're like, well, this person's been in combat and it could be any of these things?
Yeah. So in my experience, when I separated from the military, I know for a fact I had TBIs. Like even that trip in Mosul, I hit my head while I was treating a ranger who was shot in the face. I hit my head on the Kevlar thing and eventually threw up from it. I know I had TBIs. And when I did the TBI screening for the VA, it was a civilian. And he just was like, what are these shapes? What are these animals? And asked me to memorize some things. And he said, I don't have a TBI. I'm like, you're insane.
Right.
Like I went to Belvoir and had brain scans and they could see that I had lasting issues. So I think the VA has a long way to go. And to your point also, I've talked to a lot of practitioners that will suggest that they do exacerbate. So if somebody has depression, they have anxiety, but they also have PTSD and they also have traumatic brain injuries, if they all exacerbate and make everything worse.
Right.
So you got to treat all of them in different ways, different modalities to be able to get that best. And there's a lot of things out there. There's the stellate ganglion block that, Dr. Mulvaney that those folks do is, phenomenal. I could not suggest any more, higher than the ketamine. I think low dose ketamine's been introduced out there. There's mushroom therapy. Once again, I'm not.
Yeah.
I can't speak to it scientifically, or I haven't personally tried it, but there's other modalities that folks are taking a look at, and I'm happy for it. And I think some VA systems are even looking into THC as well. So hopefully we get there, but I could tell you we're not there yet.
Yeah, especially with the VA, like the stellate ganglion block. I think like you have to jump through hoops at the VA, and they don't give it for post-traumatic stress. They only give it for a certain type of pain.
Sure.
So the VA is still, like they're way behind when it comes to the level of care that a lot of people need.
I think my biggest advice to separating folks or folks that are already out, you have to take charge of your healthcare. Because if you don't, nobody else will.
Yeah.
If you think that,
That's true.
I go to the VA and I see, this provider today, I might go back and see somebody else.
Yeah.
It's not like my time in regiment where I saw the same person every time. You have to take charge of your healthcare. And don't be afraid to be open about it. Be transparent with your friends, with the people you've served with. I had people calling me up and they're like, hey, man, this is bothering me. I'm like, no shit is bothering you. You watch somebody get shot in the face. I'm not surprised that that's bothering you.
Right.
Today.
Yeah.
Right.
So, like, being open about it and talking to folks and not seeing that as a sign of weakness or anything like that, which I think we've gotten so much better about. Because while we were in, I said and saw and did things that, if I said it bothered me, would they take me off the line?
Right.
Would I lose my clearance?
Right.
What are these issues? And so we kind of hit a lot of that stuff. And it's nonsense. We don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, thank you for joining us tonight and doing this show and sharing your life experiences. Like, this has been like super cool and actually very unique to dive this deep into combat medicine.
Oh, no, I apologize. I've never done like a podcast before, and I don't really like talk about, my history that much. So it's, I got to piece it all together based off, memories and things that happened. But
you were horrible. You only made it 2 hours and 40 minutes.
And so
I'm just kidding.
I have one final shout out of shameless self-promotion.
There you go.
My book, We Defy, is coming out December 9th. The Lost Chapters of Special Forces History, about the SF teams that jumped in with backpack nuclear weapons, about the first counterterrorism unit in special operations, the guys who worked undercover in Berlin. It's available for pre-order now on Amazon, and it will be out on December 9th.
How many interviews did you do for this book, Jack?
Like probably close to 100 altogether. It's like 10 years of research. I mean, it's quite a while. So it covers Detachment A, Detachment K, Blue Light, Green Light, and the Commanders in Extremist Force. That's the 5 chapters of the book. So I appreciate if you guys go and check it out.
Order or the commies win.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, do you hate the troops?
Yeah.
I mean, what? Next... this coming Monday, we're going to have Ed Bogan on the show, a CIA senior dude. And then on Friday, we're going to have Mike West, who is in the Rhodesian and South African Special Forces. So that's what's coming up next.
Thank you, everybody. We appreciate it. Thank you, Mike. We really appreciate it. It was fantastic.
Thank you all. Stay safe.